Okay, why don't we go live? Good afternoon. I'm Chairman Maggie McIntosh, Chair of the Appropriations Committee. You're joined today by the members of the Appropriations Committee. And we have today before us several bills that will be heard in the committee, beginning with House Bill 479 and House Bill 520 from Delegate Barve, Chairman Barve. Just for those who are either beginning to log on or in the waiting room, I do want you to know that following Chairman Barve, we will have House Bill 13, House Bill 2, House Bill 114, House Bill 91, House Bill 216, House Bill 486, House Bill 460. We end the day with House Bill 456. Two of the bills, House Bill 114 and House Bill 460, are bills that will be sponsor only because these are reintroduction of bills that we heard last year. The remainder of the bills that I cited are bills that may have been introduced last year but had no action. And so we are going to take full testimony on those bills, or the new bills that have been introduced this year with new content. So again, I welcome you and just remind members that if you have questions, to raise your little blue or yellow hand, and I will call them in the order. We'll try to get through the testimony of our witnesses who've come before us and then move to questions. So let me first welcome Chairman Barve, who's here to testify on two bills. And if you would, Chairman, take them in the order of 479 and then 520.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any time limits?
There's no time limits on you, but
okay.
You're chairman, so you understand how I need brevity.
I, of course, understand. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you and your committee. And House Bill 479 is a concept that I've brought before the Appropriations Committee for several years. And so it should not be a surprise to anyone unless you have any new members of your committee. The bill has to do with the state retirement and pension system, and it limits the aggregate fees that pension managing firms can charge to our pension. Without being too repetitive with respect to what I've said in prior years, it's not a mystery. The Maryland State Pension has not performed well in terms of its earnings over the last, 30 years that I've been in General Assembly. And the fees that our pension firm pays are higher than the fees that you or I would pay if we picked up an investment package of either an index fund or a broadly managed mutual fund. And so, look, I mean, in prior years, I've suggested that maybe we ought to invest with index funds. I really don't care about that. What I do care about is that we improve the performance of the pension fund and pay lower fees. It seems to me that a fund that has 40 or $50 billion under investment ought to get better, ought to be charged substantially lower fees than Kumar Barve, who decides to go on the internet to buy an index fund or buy into a mutual fund like the American Funds Group. And I would think that the pension managers have a great deal of leverage, given the fact that we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars in assets. And so that's it. Of course, I look forward to working with your committee, with you, Madam Chair, and with your committee. I think that there's a lot of improvement that we need to undertake here, and I look forward to helping you in that. By the way, I think this is the first time I've seen Vice Chair Chang congratulations on your appointment. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to take questions in whatever order you wish to have me answer them.
Okay, and also I might point out that we have in the pensions oversight committee this year a new chairwoman by the name of Delegate Susie Proctor. So
okay.
It'll be great for you to also be in conversation with her. So I thank you.
It's always a pleasure.
And Delegate Bridges is vice chair.
Oh my God, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel now, aren't we?
We are, aren't we?
Tony's a great guy. Great man. I still miss him.
This is what happens when they move from environment and transportation to appropriations.
The abuse only escalates. Yeah.
Are there any questions of Chairman Barvey? Any questions? I better get my little screen up here so I can see, by the way.
By the way, do you have different color raised hands? I was.
Don't get me started on that.
Okay, all right, okay.
No, we do. It depends. Michelle, see if I'm right. It depends on the Zoom application you have, whether or not it's the upgraded, updated one or the older one.
I thought they were favoring you guys.
I do have two very beautiful blue hands up here. Delegate Kettleman.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Barvey, I have been on the same page as you for a number of years. I think that if we don't go to index funds, getting rid of the higher fees is certainly something that is absolutely, we would be not responsible if we didn't do something about it. What I wanted to ask is the opposition testimony talks about it annualizes net returns. I see a lot of numbers in there that don't match the numbers that I have seen before. And I wondered if you had any comment on what they've put in there.
Well, no, I haven't seen their testimony. And honestly, I haven't run the numbers this year as I did last year and the year before. I've found very few differences. The pension funds earnings typically vastly underperform the market. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. Some of the pension managing firms aren't very good. And I think that we probably ought to have a greater share of the pension in equities as opposed to fixed income instruments. But of course, that's a policy decision. If we make a deliberate decision to supposedly be safer with fixed income, which I think is not true, but if we make a policy decision to do that, then I guess, we can make a policy decision to earn less money if we want to. But regardless, if we decide that we want to put money into fixed income investments or real estate investment trusts or whatever, to me, it makes sense that we should pay the lowest fee possible. And it's true, there are index funds that do that. There are also some very reputable mutual investment packages. The American Funds Group has many packages that they offer to pension funds, and they do a terrific job. And so if we make the decision to deliberately underinvest in equities, at a minimum, we should pay lower fees. That's my feeling on the matter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Delegate Proctor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Barvey, what are the specific objections from the opposition? What have they outlined?
Well, I have to confess that I've been a little negligent. I haven't read their testimony yet, but in the past years, they've made a couple of arguments, some of which are not completely specious. For example, the current management of the pension fund will say they are doing better than the pension fund before their management. They're doing better than 5 years ago. And that's true, although it's hard to see how they could have ever possibly done worse than we were doing 5-10 years ago. Secondly, they have made the argument that some of these unusual asset classes that we invest in are necessary in order to get higher rates of return, and that the fees are justified based on that. You know, look, if that's the case, I still think the aggregate fee that we pay ought to be no more than 0.2%. I was about to say 20 basis points, but 0.2%. It seems to me it's funny, no one said this more eloquently than Warren Buffett himself, who basically said the best way to save money is to save money, to not spend as much as to spend the least that you can get away with. And I think that's very valid.
And Delegate Proctor, we have opposition that are coming up to testify, so we can hear from them what this year's, what they want to tell us this year about the bill. Any other questions? Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate Barve.
Good to see you.
A question. In the past, we've had legislation introduced that would kind of do away with the state managing their own funds and go on to some fund manager, like maybe Merrill Lynch's ZAP or some big fund manager. Do you know other states, have other states done this, or other states managing their own funds? And if there are, do you know how the performance stacks up? And as you indicated, it seems that we're not performing very well based on a lot of parameters. So do you know about how other states, or are there any other states that have just contracted out the management of their?
Well, I'm only aware of one state that has actually gone the route of, for example, of index funds, and I think that's Arizona. And when you go with an index fund, basically what you're going to do is you're going to replicate the broad market. So if the broad market goes up 10%, you're going to go up 10% minus whatever de minimis fee. And by the way, again, I don't want to write a law saying that we have to go with index funds, but it would be really great if we could get fees that are very similar to what an index fund or a broadly managed mutual fund charges.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you, Chairman Barve. We're going to now call up Andrew Palmer, who's here to testify in opposition to the bill. Committee, I might also note that Ann Gothrop and Dean Kinderdine are here from the State Retirement Agency for answers to questions only that might be directed at them. But let's hear now from Andrew. Do I have Andrew?
He's on mute.
Andrew, you have to take yourself off mute. Andrew, you need to be off mute.
It's the button in the lower left with the microphone.
There you go. Now you're okay. No. Nope. We are not hearing Andrew, and he is not on mute. Andrew, would you check your volume controls to make sure the volume on your computer or laptop is turned up?
Maybe he has a malfunctioning microphone.
Yeah, or a malfunctioning microphone. I tell you what, Delegate Barve and committee.
Madam Chair, if you want to take his testimony later on at the convenience of the committee, I don't need to have to listen to it. I mean,
committee, we have had this bill before. So I'm going to ask, I'm very sorry about the technical difficulty. I'm going to ask that you submit the unfavorable testimony in writing to the committee so we can have it. We'll have it for subcommittee and oversight. And I'm going to move to House Bill 520, Chairman Barve, to begin
Sure.
that bill. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, this is a different version of a bill that I introduced last year that has to do with geothermal energy. Just as a quick primer for this, geothermal energy can almost be thought of as a form of renewable energy, almost as a form of solar energy that runs 24/7. The ground underneath our feet has a constant temperature, I think of 55 degrees. And geothermal systems basically during the winter time use that 55 degrees to heat up a building, and then some energy source, electricity, natural gas, oil has to be used to carry it all the way up to 72 degrees. And in the summertime, it does basically the reverse sort of thing. It uses the coolness, the cools of this of the ambient temperature of the ground to cool down a building. And so it's a great way to really improve energy performance in buildings. And my view is that this is a good example of an environmental policy that both saves money and does something good for the environment. And so what my bill this year basically does is it says that if a geothermal system has a payback period of 20 years or less, a state building has to employ it. In other words, if I spend $100,000 to have a geothermal system installed for a state building, and I save that $100,000 inside of 20 years, then that would be a proper payback, and we would have to, as a state, actually do this. Now, I've shown this language to several people. And I got some, actually just yesterday, I got some recommendations for broadening the bill to say geothermal or other energy saving technologies. And I'm going to craft an amendment and offer it to the committee, Madam Chair. And I think that will strengthen the bill and strengthen our opportunity to actually save money. Finally, all I will say is that I had my legislative aide from last year testify, and I believe she's Diana Sanchez, and she went to Washington College, which has a geothermal system on campus. And I believe she's offered written testimony in favor of the bill. My personal view is that energy saving technologies ought to be employed by the state to help clean the environment and save money for the taxpayers. And a 20-year payback period is what I understand is the typical standard that state agencies use currently, and that's why I chose 20 years. But if you want to make it some other number, I'm perfectly happy to concede that point. So with that, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
I'll get Kittleman.
I just had one quick question. When I was reading about geothermal, we actually have that in one of the houses on the farm.
Yeah.
Doesn't it require, what about a building in the middle of downtown that doesn't have any ground around it?
Well, the reason I wrote the bill to say that it has to have a 20-year payback is that if it's really difficult to build geothermal, it would be impossible to have a payback period of 20 years. So, if you have pure granite underneath your building, that would probably be a payback period of 100 years or something if you were to attempt it.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. The only person signed up is actually unfavorable is Bruce Bariano. With Vicinity Energy is Mr. Bariano in the meeting.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Appropriations Committee. It's a pleasure to see all of you.
Yeah, but 2 minute, by the way. Time.
In light of my conversations with Chairman Barve, the sponsor of the bill, and what he just said here, it would dramatically change our position. We are not opposed to geothermal energy sources. Vicinity Energy, Madam Chair, has 28 miles of piping in Baltimore City downtown. They've been there for 100 years. As other companies, they recently spun off from Veolia and are providing tremendous service in Baltimore City to all the federal courthouse, the state buildings, all the government buildings, City Hall, public housing, and residential, as well as office buildings too. We just did not think that there should be such rigidity in this bill, but that the use of geothermal should depend upon other available technologies that would be based upon the economic and the risk factors and environmental, and really what is the best. And in light of Chairman Barvey's amendments and loosening up the bill and everything, we would love to work with them in this regard. We're a company that has a goal of by 2050 to be carbon free, and we are looking for new technologies that environmentally and financially make sense. So thank you very much. You also have a statement from Matt Ware of our company that expresses our thoughts and views, but we are an environmentally friendly energy company. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Kittleman?
Happens all the time.
Delegate Kittleman?
I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, okay, that's all right. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much, and
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Back to,
Great to have you over in our committee, okay?
it's always great to be with you. Take care.
Uh-huh. All right, committee, we're now going to move to House Bill 13, Delegate Lukey, who will be presenting the bill. I also want to note that joining us for this hearing on this bill will be, I believe, 3 delegates from Ways and Means who are jointly assigned this bill. So we have delegates Carr, Ivy, and Long, who will be joining us. So welcome to the Appropriations Committee, and Delegate Lukey, if you would take the podium.
I will, Madam Chair. And actually, I just got a geothermal system installed in my house last fall. So that was a fun previous hearing too.
That's good. I'm glad.
All right. So House Bill 13 does not have to do with geothermal heating systems. It has to do instead with the protection of taxpayer dollars and making sure that Marylanders have the opportunity to equally access what I believe to be a fundamental right, which is the right to join in organizations, to represent people who work, and then to collectively bargain for agreements that will treat workers fairly. And so in order to understand the purpose of this bill, it will help you to know that there is an entire industry built around a concept called union avoidance, which is an industry that exists so that when a group of workers is seeking to unionize, that group of workers, the business that employs that group of workers, will have somebody to turn to help fight back against that unionization effort. Some of the tactics used by these union avoidance folks can range widely. It could be as simple as spreading misinformation about what it means to be joining a union. It could be requiring employees to attend on company time meetings where information is given to them that attacks the union. There are all sorts of tactics that are used under the heading of union avoidance. And look, you know, there are differences of opinion about unions and about union avoidance. This bill is really fundamentally about whether taxpayer dollars should be used to fund these union avoidance efforts. I'm of a belief that the taxpayer shouldn't be on the hook for this, and they are in 2 ways. When it comes to public employees, public institutions will sometimes use taxpayer dollars to fund union avoidance efforts. In fact, that has happened here in Maryland. And in the private sector, the way the federal tax code works, a business can claim the expense of hiring a union avoidance consultant as a business expense and deduct it from their taxes. Essentially, American taxpayers are subsidizing businesses to fight unions. And I don't believe either of those situations is appropriate. So this bill has 2 parts. One of them is familiar to the committee because it's similar to a bill that I had introduced a few years ago that I believe ended up passing committee and the House in an amended version. And that would say that public employers could not engage in activities that either fight back against unions or actually promote unions. That provision is very clear either way, right? The taxpayer dollars should not be used for these purposes. The other provision is what's called an addition modification, which is Ways and Means talk for, we're just gonna say you don't get a tax deduction in Maryland anymore for business expenses spent on union avoidance consultants. And I think this is just about fair treatment. Allowing workers the chance to exercise what I think is a fundamental right without taxpayers subsidizing attempts to undermine that right. And that's the bill, Madam Chair. I am happy to answer any and all questions from members of the committees.
Okay, Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I promise I don't have questions on every bill. In my former life, when I left law school, I was a labor and employment attorney.
Mhm.
And so I went back to see if my recollection was correct. The feds set up the NLRB and they made laws that made a balance between the unions and the employers, so that the law tries to keep both sides having certain advantages and not. This upsets the balance, and it's interesting because I don't know if you have had the Attorney General do an opinion on this, but one of the things that the Supreme Court has said is if the application of state law would upset the balance of power between labor and management established by the NLRA, then it would not be not constitutional, would be against, wouldn't be able to do it. And the other piece of it, when you're talking about it's the taxpayer money, this goes back to the origins of unions. And the people who initially set up the whole union structure were very clear that public entities were never to have unions because you don't have the same investment in the money, since we're spending taxpayers' money. So we start off with that. And I think to put any more handicap on the employers who are us isn't something that we really want to do. I don't think our taxpayers would be very happy with that.
I wasn't sure what your question was, Delegate.
Well, I just would like, don't you agree with me?
No, absolutely. I do not agree with you. I think anybody that looks at federal labor law and thinks that it sets up a fair playing field between labor and management is kidding themselves. I think that public employees, like any other employee in the country, have a right to collectively bargain. And that's a decision that Maryland made back in the 1960s as a result, actually, of a strike by the union I used to belong to as a teacher. I don't think we should take away any of those rights. And I do not think that taxpayer dollars should be used to subsidize a tax on union members and workers.
Delegate McKay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, sir, is it's prohibiting the use of public funds through this income tax modification. Can you clarify to me the difference between public funds being used by public unions by coming to the General Assembly and issuing a bill that may or may not have been in negotiations? I don't say the right word is circumvent the negotiations between management and labor by using a bill. I don't mean that negative, but I don't know what other word to use. So can you tell me the difference between this and using the General Assembly, which is public funds, to get what the union would like to see happen?
Well, so in the case you're talking about a union that's already been formed and is advocating for its members. That union is an association of free Americans who have the right to assemble under the First Amendment, and they're exercising that right. And that's something, frankly, I think they should be proud of and should be encouraged to do. What we're talking about here in union avoidance happened before the union has even formed to develop collective bargaining rights for the members in a specific workplace. So it's at a different stage in the process. I don't think the government should be spending taxpayer dollars, fighting against the workers that are employed either by public employees, and I don't think we should be subsidizing private sector businesses to do that either.
Okay, well, thank you for your answer. I'm not sure where it goes in the process before or after, but I do think it speaks to public unions using the General Assembly tax dollars by submitting bills is kind of the same thing. But we'll agree to disagree, and so
yeah, I think telling any association of Americans that they can't advocate for legislation violates the Constitution. So that's
I think that the issue is not, I'm not disagreeing with you that we shouldn't be telling somebody or taking away somebody's rights. Your bill speaks to public funds going towards. And so I think they're two different, but thank you, Delegate.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We'll agree to disagree.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're going to go to folks who are here to testify in favor of House Bill 13. You have a 2-minute time frame in which to testify. And we have, I see 2 people. First of all, Terry Kavanaugh from SEIU, and secondly, Donna Edwards, the Maryland State DC AFL-CIO. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify. Terry Kavanaugh with the SEIU Maryland and DC State Council. I'll be brief. The bill addresses the use of anti-union or union-busting campaigns in both the private sector and the public sector. And first, I'd like to address the public sector. Public budgets appear to be divided into 2 kinds. One, when the burden is on budgets is great, and the other when it's greater. You have heard from many public employers about their need for additional resources to fulfill their mission, but what you may not hear about is how some public employers can find the money to pay law firms to campaign against their employees' choice on whether they want to be represented or not. We have seen public administrations within the very county of Annapolis spending tens of thousands of dollars of precious public dollars on union busting, or as the firms advertise, union avoidance. There's been a change recently. On January 22nd, President Joe Biden in an executive order issued these words: "It is the policy of the United States to encourage union organizing and collective bargaining. The federal government should serve as a model employer. We believe the same should apply to the state of Maryland. Serve as a model employer." And you'd ask yourself, would a model employer spend scant public resources attempting to thwart or influence an election in which the employer is not even on the ballot? The choice for workers is whether or not they wish to be represented by a labor organization for the purpose of collective bargaining. The choice is theirs. An employer, especially a model public employer, should be neutral in this decision by the workforce. Maryland would not be the first to pass this kind of legislation. Others have done it. I'm most familiar with Oregon. Workers have a choice. If they want to have an election, they petition for an election. The election is conducted by the Public Employee Relations Board. If the union prevails in the majority, they become the exclusive representative. In the private sector, I'll be just to finish up. We shouldn't allow workers' money to be used against them in campaigns, and that's what really happens by employers being able to deduct these expenses on their federal taxes. So we appreciate the majority leader introducing the bill, and we'd ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to have Ms. Edwards come up, and then we'll take questions.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and District of Columbia AFL-CIO. You have our testimony. Let me just follow up on a couple of the questions that was proposed. One is, this does not change the balance of power. Nothing in this bill denies the right to any private company or any government entity from hiring union busting lawyers or companies. They can go ahead and do that. What we're asking is that what becomes prohibited is using taxpayers' dollars to do that. And the reason that it is right now, businesses are incentivized in Maryland to deny the right to collectively bargain with their workers because they can take that expense off of their taxes. If an employer is afraid of their employees and instead of wanting to collectively sit down and talk with them, which may cost them far less than the thousands that they spend on trying to bust unions, we might have a much more positive work site and workplace for businesses and workers in this state. So this does not prohibit anyone from still wanting to hire people to try to discourage workers from being organized at their own will, at their own elections. But it does say that workers who, by the way, it is workers in Maryland who provide the bulk of the tax dollars that we spend through the General Assembly. It's saying that workers should not be funding anti-worker, anti-union busting in Maryland. We urge a favorable vote on House Bill 13.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Are there any questions? I see none. Thank you very much, Delegate Lukey. Good to have you in our committee.
Thank
And
you. I'm happy to come back anytime and talk geothermal energy, Madam Chair.
Okay, good, good. Have a great day, everyone. It's good to see everyone, and thank you for your cooperation in this virtual reality that we find ourselves.
Thank you. It was really good to see everybody.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We're now going to turn to House Bill 2, Delegate Corman, which is the Maryland Environmental Services Reform Act of 2021. And I do want to mention that we are again joined by 3 members of the Environment and Transportation Committee who are going to be with us today because they are jointly assigned on this bill. And that is the Vice Chair of that committee, Delegate Stein, and also Delegate Ruth and Delegate Otto. So we welcome you to the Appropriations Committee hearing. And again, if you have questions, please, we ask our members to raise their little blue or little yellow hand. And with that, I will turn it over to our own Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Last summer, thanks to some reporting from the Baltimore Sun and then some other outlets, we found out some challenging things about the Maryland Environmental Service, which is a quasi-state agency that is under our purview. I, along with the other members of the Joint Committee on Fair Practice from the House side, that includes Delegate Barron, our former Vice Chair Delegate Jackson, and our colleague Delegate Greist, spent a lot of time digging into this issue over the past 6 or 7 months. And the bill before you is largely an outgrowth of that work. Now, let me just say, there was certainly what appears to be some personal misbehavior by people involved in the MES, and it's very hard to correct for somebody's personal misbehavior. But we also found a lot of institutional failures in our look at this agency. And so the legislation before you is designed to restore some accountability and oversight and stewardship of the agency that frankly does use the public's dollars. It doesn't use general fund appropriations from our income and sales tax dollars, but 95% of its funds come from state and local government, and it benefits actually from revenue from our general obligation bonds go towards MES projects. So it's definitely our job to know what this quasi-agency is doing. I'm just going to briefly list, you have a fact sheet and testimony either in the system or it was emailed around to your offices this morning. I'm going to read through the provisions. It removes the director from the MES Board of Directors. It adds the state treasurer to the MES Board of Directors. It requires that one of the public sector appointees come from a list recommended by MACO and MML. It clarifies that no MAS employee may serve on the Board of Directors of MES. It requires MES board members to participate in annual training regarding ethics, duty of care, harassment, diversity, and MES's policies. It puts a number of transparency provisions on MES that we've put on other state agencies involving the web streaming of their meetings, the posting of their agenda ahead of time. It requires the board of MES to promulgate or repromulgate a number of policies on severance, bonuses, tuition, expense reimbursement, travel, diversity, whistleblower complaints, use of cars, use of laptops, and use of cell phones. And when I say use of cars, use of laptops, and use of cell phones, I mean those owned and controlled by MES or the government. I don't mean someone's personal cell phone. And these were all the types of things that apparently the procedures, those that were in place, were not accurately enforced, and some didn't exist at all. It clarifies that MES board members have the same standard of care as board members under the Corporations and Associations article. Bans severance for executives moving to other positions in state service. It requires an annual report on how MES is helping the state achieve its Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act goals. It requires operational contracts of the MES valued at more than $250,000 to go to the Board of Public Works. It requires a diversity officer be set up. It does two other things that are a little bit more complicated. One, right now, MES's practice is to have contracts of any kind that are over $250,000 to be approved by the MES board. The legislation before you lowers that to $25,000, but in an amendment I'll talk about in a minute, we propose to raise that back up. And we do a little bit of cleanup. 4 years ago, the governor allowed to become law legislation by our colleague Pat Young to allow MES employees to collectively bargain. And even though we all knew that's what that legislation was and why we either voted or voted against it for that reason, that legislation unfortunately has been without effect for some technical reasons. And so this bill handles the technical reasons to give the MES employees the same ability to collectively bargain that those of us who were here in 2017 thought we already gave them, even if in some cases it was over our no votes. As I said, there is an amendment. It has some further cleanup on the labor provisions. It changes that threshold of MES board approval to 125,000. Has a few other, what I would just sort of call more detailed changes to the bill, excluding a certain type of federal contract from BPW review, for example, a few things like that. Now, let me say that, in August, when the governor was asked about MES, he said, MES is a strange creature, don't know much about what goes on over there, even though he thought the head of MES was fit to be his chief of staff. Thankfully, since August, the governor's changed his tune, and I appreciate that he has set up the STAR Commission, chaired by our former colleague, Andy Serafini, to look at all quasi-government agencies, including MES, and has put in his own MES reform bill. I met with his office, as did my Senate cross-filer, Senator McCray, and there's a lot of very positive things in their bill. There's a lot of similarities with what we put in, and a lot of other positive things we can add to one bill or the other. So certainly looking forward to working with them further for a bill that has broad support and gets at some of the real challenges we've seen with MES and how they have been acting. So with that, Madam Chair, looking forward to everybody's questions.
Thank you. We do have one from Delegate Krim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, do you know, or does this cover who authorizes MES to submit testimony on behalf of that agency?
You're probably going to have to ask Dr. Glass that when he begins to speak. I can't speak.
I will. Thank you. Thank you.
And if I may add, Madam Chair, I mentioned meeting with the governor's office. I've also met with Dr. Glass and his colleagues outside of the joint committee process, and they've also been very cooperative on trying to figure out a way to improve the agency. And I will say I've been watching their monthly board meetings on YouTube, and I appreciate that every month Dr. Glass gets up and lists very few expenses that he has had in contrast to his predecessor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions of the sponsor at this time? And you are working with the governor's office, you are working with the agency. So our hope is that what we pass will be easily signed into law.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. All right. At this point, we'll bring up Mr. Glass, please, from the Maryland Environmental Service Agency. Okay. Do we have Mr. Glass?
talking, but we can't hear him, Madam Chair.
Oh, Mr. Glass? He's not on mute. Here we go. We'll be patient in this virtual setting and give him a minute to see if he can't get his volume. Can you say something, Mr. Glass, so we can see if we can hear you? No, we can't hear you. I'm afraid we are going to have to ask you to submit your testimony in writing. I think, in fact, you are submitting it in writing, and you are favorable with amendment. And so what I'm going to ask is that you go ahead and submit it in writing, and we will absolutely, in our subcommittee process and in our voting.
Can you hear me now?
Oh my goodness, what did you do? So we can tell everybody.
So, so there was you allowing me, but when I came in, it didn't let me come in as the Senate side did. So somehow there is a difference when the holding in the waiting room. I'm sorry. I'll read my comments, and I'll try to be as brief as possible to catch up on your time.
All right, you've had
good afternoon, Madam Chair McIntosh. Do I have only 30 seconds left? Or
you've got 2 minutes. No, 2 minutes.
I still have my 2 minutes? Okay, I'm sorry. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass. I'm the acting director of the Maryland Environmental Service. I am here today in support of House Bill 2, the Maryland Environmental Service Reform Act of 2021. I first want to thank the bill's sponsor, Delegate Corman, for the positive conversation on Monday. As I said, MES supports this legislation with some potential amendments. We see areas of strong agreement. Changes to the board structure are necessary and should occur, and I've been trying to facilitate that since August. However, I would urge caution in deliberations upon changes to MES's procurement and personnel processes. Some of those are already being addressed in Delegate Corman's amendments, and in support of the the State Transparency and Accountability Reform Commission that Governor Hogan has established. The commission will bring together a wide range of individuals, including former Senator Andrew Serafini in leading that organization, that commission, and it will conclude with a large report, I'm sure, on all independent state agencies by December 1st of 2021. I greatly appreciate Delegate Corman's approach. As he alluded to, there are some complicated issues surrounding how MES supports both the state agencies and some federal grants, but also lots of local and county governments. And we just want to be careful as we address those issues. But we're fully supportive of the bill, and we're all working towards that, and there's great communication already taking place. I have lots of things that I have done that I've led on at MES since I came to MES, but just with the limited time I have, I just want to mention a few. I have incorporated into MES policy the requirement, as Delegate Corman mentioned, of the executive director presenting to the board a detailed monthly expense report, both expenses that are reimbursed and for anything on the purchase card used by the executive director. That has been established as a board resolution that will carry on until the board changes that resolution. So it's not just on me as executive director, or acting director, it's for any future director of MES. I directed the establishment of an internal work group charged with reviewing all of MES's policies. They are working to ensure best practices and the rules to enforce those best practices and those policies. This is ongoing, but I expect it to be completed this spring. And as Delegate Corman mentioned prior to the bill even being let, actually in response to a comment on Twitter from a journalist, all MES board or directors meetings are now presented live on YouTube just like this, and they are archived along with the meeting agenda and the meeting minutes. And we've also included all meeting minutes going back to 1970 in the infancy of MES, and they are archived on our website. Thank you very much for allowing the time. I apologize for my miscommunication with Zoom. I'm pretty savvy as an engineer, but I made a mistake this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.
That's
Madam.
all right. Thank you. And thank you for your testimony. We do have
Oh,
we have a
questions, of
couple
course.
of questions. Yes. Delegate Beitzel first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Glass, glad to have you with us. You know, it's too bad that, you know, we rotten apple in the barrel and it ends up spoiling the whole barrel. And in this case, we have legislation that hopefully keep the apples in the barrels from getting rotten. So anyway, I have a question, and I'm a former administrator of the Garrett County Sanitary District, where I was in charge of that sanitary district for 18 years. And I know a little bit about water and wastewater treatment. And I've worked extensively with MES in the past, and they have a very important job of making sure that our citizens have potable drinking water, and it's clean water and safe to drink, and that we have to take care of wastewater facilities that help keep our streams clean in the Chesapeake Bay and our environment and other functions that MES performs. One of the things that concerns me about the bill, and I know the maker of the bill said it's being addressed, but there's one issue in there that concerns me somewhat, because you're providing a service to a lot of the counties and municipalities, and particularly in Western Maryland, where you handle all the wastewater treatment facilities and water systems in the state parks. And also you've now contracted and have a contract with Garrett County to provide operation and supervision of all their water and sewer systems. That I'm responsible for putting in place a lot of those. At Deep Creek Lake, we have the largest small diameter pressure sewer system, probably east of the Mississippi. Perhaps Tampa may now have one bigger, but that system is very has a lot of mechanical components, a lot of pumps and things that are necessary for that system to operate. And if one of those big wastewater pumps or something goes down, it's important that somebody is be able to act immediately to fix it. And so, and sometimes those fixes are very costly. And I know we have sole sourced a lot of stuff on that system from Myers Pump Company. And so my concern is, and I want to know if you are able to address this concern and how it impact your operations. If you're limited to the amount of money that you can authorize to put into place either improvements or to impact maintenance immediately, there's a lot of damage can be done while you're waiting on getting those approvals. So I'm concerned about the $125,000 number limiting you to be able to do things. And in this case, in Garrett County, say just using the Deep Creek Lake as an example, and there are systems that you operate across the state are much bigger than those, that it would take you some time to get in place the ability to be able to get the components and things that are necessary to fix those if you're limited to that amount. Do you have any thoughts on that? And in this case, usually those costs are going to be transferred to the county or the agencies that you're providing service to. You won't be paying them directly out of your operating budget. But so since those costs are being incurred by the counties, can't we do something in this bill to limit? Limit the restrictions that are on you to be able to move forward with these improvements. Can you comment on that?
Yes. It's a concern that I've expressed to Senator McCray and Delegate Corman is the actual operations versus the concerns from the summer and the actions of my predecessor that really had to do with overhead executive expenditures. So, I'm willing to be managed down to a $50 expense and report all of it for the executive budget that I manage. I don't even at the executive level. There was a break last night at Rocky Gap State Park. We could create contract vehicles. There was a water line break about 10 feet. And there were operators for MES in the county out there all night till 4 a.m. they don't ask for to move that heavy equipment or any supplies, and hopefully they have everything on hand. But those types of emergency response in the environmental engineering circumstances, you know, either we have to just go to emergency powers or we have to create contracts that are well in advance. But my biggest fear is operational challenges based on requirements in this legislation. It's already been 25,000 obviously was super low in the context of chemicals and equipment and original equipment manufacturers. I'm still in the analysis from Monday getting the direction, looking at anything between 125 and 250 over the last couple of years that fell in that category. But there are expensive pumps, and as you know, in wastewater, there are expensive things that keep things going. And I just have to make sure that everything is aligned for us to keep meeting the needs of the counties. The other issue in that same vein is, yes, 95% of the funds are state, local, or county. The counties in other agreements, the midshore landfill, if they direct as the managers of that agreement, that contract vehicle that MES and the midshore counties are involved in, not the state of Maryland as a whole, do I take now to the BPW a $500,000 piece of equipment that is for compacting trash at a landfill? I just need to get all the clarification on those types of issues from Delegate Corman and Senator McCray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just follow up a little bit.
Yes.
On this particular issue, you know, I obviously know the maker of the bill very well, and he's the chairman of my subcommittee, and we deal with this issue. And so I've known him to be these concerns. If you're concerned about these things as much as I am, could you kind of sit down with him and list maybe some things that we can improve this bill to give you the flexibility to act in emergency situations on these type of situations?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Delegate Prim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Glass, I asked Delegate Corman this earlier, but he said you would be the person to answer. Who in your organization is responsible for submitting testimony on legislation?
I have a recently hired colleague from MDOT, Jeff Tosi, and he and I work on it, but the entire executive team works on testimony and works on all things involved with operations of MES. So, and the Attorney General for MES has a slightly different role than Attorney Generals at other organizations. I only say slightly because he is the attorney for the board as well. So it's a unique role. When I was at DNR or at MDOT, those Attorney Generals don't serve commissions or anyone else inside MDOT. They work with the secretaries and the deputy secretaries to manage the facility. So Mr. Tosi and I are the main workers on any responses.
Okay, so if I have an issue with the testimony from MES, who should I talk to?
Mr. Jeff Tosi.
Thank
J
you.
Tosi at menv.com.
I know who he is.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for Dr. Glass's benefit, Mr. Tosi spent a lot of time before this committee and Vice Chair Krim's subcommittee. Just maybe a line of question to help put my colleague Delegate Beitzel mind at rest. At the moment, if you have a $250,000 or greater expense, whether it's for a project or an operational or an administrative issue for anything else, the board has to approve that at the monthly meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Over $250,000, yes.
Yeah, so with the amendment, we're basically just lowering that down to $125,000 to $249,999.99.
Repeat that question. If
we adopt the bill and the amendment that you and I have discussed before, we would be talking about things between $125,000 and $250,000 would be now subject to that same policy you already have for those larger expenses?
Yes. They would now 125,000 would be included in everything that must go to the board before we can act. Yes.
Right, but right now you already have that policy for $250,000 or greater. That's
yes. Yes, sir.
Great. And we already met on Monday, so I already knew what Delegate Beitzel was going to want me to do. And we already agreed you were going to get us a list of those expenditures from last year or so we could see how big the scope of the issue is.
Yes, and I saw a draft. We just haven't sent it to you yet.
Great. Look forward to
We're working on it.
you and my colleagues on that. Thank you very much, Dr. Glass. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
As always, ahead of the curve, ahead of the curve. Thank you very much. I see no other questions. I want to thank everyone, and I'm Mr. Glass, I'm glad you got in. We got to hear your voice. So thank you for your participation, and Delegate Lehrman, as always, thank you for a good bill hearing. This concludes the bill hearing, and we're now going to move to House Bill 114, Delegate Lehrman. Committee, as we move to this bill, I will say, and I'm joking, okay, Delegate Lehrman, don't get upset. I looked at the list of bills today. I saw this bill and 2 or 3 others, and I thought, well, let me pack my dinner. I see, thank goodness, that this is a sponsor-only bill because it is very similar to the bill we passed last year. But committee, I do want to say this in all seriousness. Even though this is sponsor only, I commend you all to look at the written testimony that has been submitted with this bill to us. 63 people have submitted written testimony on this bill, and I think it's important for those of you on this committee to go through that testimony. With that, we welcome you again, Delegate Lehrman, back to the Appropriations Committee and to present House Bill 114.
Great. Well, good afternoon, committee members and friends and colleagues. It's wonderful to see you today. This is sponsor only, but that doesn't mean no PowerPoints. But I promise I will be brief and as brief as I can be. So this is the bill that many of you remember from last year, all about MTA and the needs of MTA. So first I want to start off with MTA because I know that some folks were not here last year. So just to talk a little bit about MTA. MTA funds or runs transit in some way in every county of the states. Yes, even in Caroline County and Talbot County and Garrett County and Allegheny, it is funding locally operated transit systems. It runs local bus service in Central Maryland, of course, Baltimore City County, the county, Anne Arundel County, our paratransit. It runs MARC commuter rail. It runs the lonely subway line in Baltimore that tens of thousands of people actually use every day. And it runs the light rail that connects so many people to work throughout the city and county region. It provides hundreds of thousands of rides average workday before the pandemic. And of course, paratransit continues to grow at a rapid clip. It's the 13th largest transit system in the United States. And I love this graphic because I think it does a great job at really demonstrating how big it is. One thing that I didn't mention is the commuter bus service. It also runs commuter bus service that many people all around the state really depend on. And as legislators, you know, it's our job includes oversight to ensure we're not kicking the budgetary can down the road, that we're taking care of what we have now and preserving it for future generations. Our job, of course, is also to ensure that our tax dollars are being spent efficiently, effectively, and in a way that benefits Marylanders and supports our economy. And finally, our job is to make sure that government is working for our constituents. That it means in any way that we or they can imagine. And right now, I think it's safe to say that one government function that isn't working adequately for our constituents and for Marylanders around the state is our public transit system, is the Maryland Transit Administration. So don't believe me? Let's just look at a few of the things that have happened over the past few years. Just a few years ago, the entire Baltimore metro system closed down without any notice to anybody. That meant tens of thousands, 40,000 people a day had to figure out immediately on no notice how to get to work the next day. We also know that there was a survey done just a year and a half ago on light rail service. In every single day of the month, except for one, light rail service was interrupted and didn't work. How do we compare to the rest of the country? Well, this is how we compare. We're the first in bus breakdowns. We're the first in light rail breakdowns. We're the first in commuter rail breakdowns. So I think this really demonstrates this is not the norm, right? It doesn't have to be like this. We can have transit systems that work and that function for Marylanders and for your constituents and my constituents. Other transit systems around the country are keeping up with the needs of their constituents, and ours can too. So how did we get here? I'm not here to blame MTA. I think that they are doing the best they can with what they have. But unfortunately, in the past few years, MTA's share of the Transportation Capital Program has fallen from 31% to 19%. And you can see here, it's 2% over the since fiscal 2013 base in terms of how our Transportation Trust Fund dollars have been allocated. So a few years ago, we, working with Delegate Corman and working with the governor, we passed legislation to ask MTA and MDOT to do a capital needs inventory because we needed to know, right? What is the state of MTA's assets? If we are going to be responsible and take care of the assets that we have as a state, we need to know how they're doing and what we need to keep them up in a state of good repair. So what we found from that report is that MTA was severely underfunded. Over the next 10 years, there's $2 billion, in fact, gap between what's needed and what is allocated. So what does this bill do? This bill does not find them all of that money. However, it does make serious and important steps towards allocating funding to make sure that we are meeting our state of good repair needs for MTA assets. This legislation provides funding for MTA's backlog of state of good repair needs, and those state of good repair needs are in this report. There's a list of them broken down, and this report will be updated every 3 years from now on so that we will always know what the needs are that MTA has. Some of those needs include maintaining light rail and subway tracks, maintaining park and ride lots used by the commuter bus system, MARC safety and security systems, as well as bus and bus shelter maintenances, provides funding for electronic enhancements, routine updates to software, positive train control. It would allow MTA to improve access and accessibility for MARC and bus stations, bus shelter examination, things like that. Really basic things that our transit system needs in order for people to be able to use it. The numbers that we put in the bill this year are numbers that are based on the legislation that this Appropriations Committee, in its as wise it is, passed out last year, and that we passed through the entire House and then just ran out of time in the Senate to pass. Based on the new CTP that was released after this bill was filed, we will ask the committee to amend the legislation to reflect the CTP's capital allocations over the next few years. This bill provides an average annual increase of about $90 million for MTA capital needs. And in total, MDOT would redirect about $540 million in capital spending over the lifespan of the entire of the bill. So if you take a look at this, you'll see in the second column, those lines in green, 454, 34, 417, those are the numbers, starting with the 417, that we would want in the bill. Right now, it's the one next to it, 361 and 414 and 453. So that would be the amendment. Because as you can see, MTA and MDOT rather, in its CTP actually significantly increased in this year's CTP the capital allocations over the next few years for MTA, recognizing, I hope and believe, that there are serious state of good repair needs that have to be addressed to keep riders safe. So I'll stop this now. So just final 3 points on why this bill really matters. This bill is absolutely critical to job creation and job retention here in Maryland. Just ask any major employer who has employees taking transit, from the casinos to the Port of Baltimore, to our hospitals, to our educational institutions. Only 60 to 70% of buses arrive on time, meaning that employers just can't rely on their employee base that uses transit. Issues with our transit system end up making Marylanders late to work, late to health appointments, to school, and other obligations. And this, of course, disproportionately impacts communities of color, persons with disabilities, and low-income communities who have much less access to transportation to reach their critical destinations each day. 2, At a time when public transit is more critical than ever to people's lives and to restoring the economy, we just can't continue to kick the can down the road. We have to make these repairs now or they get more expensive later on. The pandemic, I think, has made the need for a better public transit system even more urgent. In Maryland, 35%, all of Maryland, 35% of public transit commuters have essential jobs, with healthcare workers making up the largest share, commuting to Johns Hopkins Hospital, University of Maryland Medical System, MedStar Health, LifeBridge, St. Agnes Hospital, and more. These jobs cannot be done from home. 1 in 3 Baltimore residents owns a car, and many simply can't afford one. But these healthcare workers, they need to be able to get to work. The transportation sector, third, is the biggest contributor to climate pollution in the state. And reliable and connected transit is necessary to reduce climate congestion and pollution by providing riders an alternative to single occupancy vehicles. In fact, Governor Hogan's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act plan, his plan released in 2019, absolutely fundamentally relies on additional transit funding to meet its goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Reliable transit is essential for connecting Marylanders to employment opportunities and investing in the sustainability of our state. So with that, it is my hope that you will act like you did last year and vote favorably on HB 114. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Are there any questions of Delegate Beitzel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Delegate Lehrman. Good
Hi.
presentation. It's a repeat of last year, but
Yep.
much better. It's more information there. I guess one of my concerns is, what you're essentially doing here is robbing Peter to pay Paul. And obviously there are needs that you've outlined and very good reason and justification for. But if you move them from one category to another category, then that category from the public, not take it from the highway user or from the transportation trust fund that's supported basically by highway user fees and putting it in mass transit, then what's going to happen to our highways and our bridges? And there's 92% or so of the people that they get around, and the transportation form that they use is the automobile or trucks or whatever. So no argument at all that we have a problem. It's clearly with your graphs were they depicted that. But is there any way, or have you ever considered looking at some other form of revenue to support these things, rather than just taking it away from the State Highway Administration and their need to keep up our highways? And then the other thing that's really troubling is that, one of the things, and you addressed air pollution and public, and the automobile and transportation is contributing the biggest source of that in the state. We're going to electric vehicles, and there's a move to electric vehicles, and you're supporting that move, and I support that move. And obviously the huge benefit that's going to be is reduction in air pollution and those sort of things with cleaner environment. But when that happens, there's even less money coming into the Transportation Trust Fund. So I think you got to look for another answer to where these monies are going to come from. And if you consider that.
It's a great question, Delegate, and thank you for that. And also, by the way, I'll be in your neighborhood this weekend.
Oh, great. The skiing's great. That's what's coming up. About 2 feet of snow.
Yep. So it's a great question. And I think that it is really important for our Secretary of Transportation and our governor, who are ultimately responsible for ensuring we have the money that we need to get these things done, to also be thinking about that, and to them, and that they should themselves take a look at whether we need more money in the Transportation Trust Fund and come up with some creative ways that we could raise that money. Certainly would love to see ideas from Secretary Slater and Governor Hogan on raising revenue for transportation, and would love to engage in a conversation with them about their ideas on what that would look like. I also think, though, I don't think it's necessarily fair to presuppose that we will have to take money from the State Highway Administration or elsewhere. So first of all, in the CTP right now, the updated CTP that just came out, MDOT has already allocated more money than was in this bill that was passed last year for MTA capital needs for the next 3 years. So they've already done that, right? The first 3 years are taken care of. We can follow their numbers, just make sure they stay in and that they don't go back on their word. So they've already found some of that money, and they did it without taking money away from SHA. They also this year found $100 million for the Purple Line, which was great because we need to build the Purple Line. And they did that without, again, if you go talk to them, they'll say they didn't take money away from SHA. So I do think that it is not necessarily right to assume that this will lead to some sort of cancellation of other projects. And finally, I'll just say, most of our transit relies on roads, right? Our commuter buses, our paratransit, our core bus service. We need the roads to be good. We need them to be safe. All of the locally operated transit systems, like the one in Garrett County, Garrett Transit Services, it needs the roads to be safe and functional. And so there is a marriage there, and we have to do all of it. And so I just don't want us to always be thinking of this as either or. Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may just follow up a little bit, not to prolong the discussion here, but you mentioned Garrett Transportation System, and there is a Garrett Transportation System, but there's no public scheduled transportation. It's just a special needs transportation system. We do get some funds for that, but there is no public transportation system anywhere in Garrett County and many of our rural counties in the state. And so, you mentioned the Purple Line. Again, I think many of us recognize that we need to have improvements to our public transportation systems. But the Purple Line is one example where we ran into a problem with the contract there and everything, and there's more money that took money that had to come from somewhere. And when that comes online, there's going to be additional public monies coming in, or transportation trust fund monies coming into the Purple Line just to operate it. And that number, in round numbers, the number that I have is like $170 some million or so will need to be coming out of the transportation fund just to operate it, subsidize it when it's in operation. Well, all the money that's coming out of the transportation money that comes to local jurisdictions and highway user revenue is about 175, 200. Well, it's a little more than that now because we put an additional amount. It's 225. But we're taking that 116 point something miles of light rail and going to be taking the same amount of money out of the Transportation Trust Fund as what we were getting for the highway user revenue for all the counties and municipalities in the state. So I think we got to look seriously at coming up with some other means of funding these things rather than just keep taking them out of the Transportation Trust Fund. Don't you agree?
I agree. We have to have more funding in the Transportation Trust Fund. And I think it would be, I think it's the governor and the Secretary of Transportation. Yes. Part of their job is to come up with ways to increase revenue for the Transportation Trust Fund. So, perhaps before Governor Hogan leaves office, he will surprise us all and come up with a revenue bill for transportation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. You're welcome, Delegate. And if I can interject in this conversation, and if he doesn't, we'll have to. I mean, that's the truth, okay?
Somebody has to be responsible.
Yes, because we do have to be responsible. Because the points that Delegate Beitzel is raising are valid.
Yes.
The needs in your bill are valid. And there are other pressures, of course, that are going to be a part of our Transportation Trust Fund dialogue in the future that are going to be valid. And so this is, we did pass your bill. I will only speak for myself and say how strongly I support this bill. But I will tell you that I think the dialogue you've just had, by the way, both of you, is very important.
Yep.
I let it go on because it is important, and it's something that if the governor and the secretary won't deal with it in the next 2 years, the next governor in this legislature will have to. And because we want to be responsible.
Yep.
And I hear you. Delegate Krim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Delegate Learman, I've given this a lot of thought. So in the state highway program, we have the system preservation program. And that's approved in the budget every year. And in fact, when we don't have enough money to expand the system, we make sure that system preservation is funded.
Yes.
Because we have to, the state has to protect their infrastructure. So why can't we have the same thing in transit? I mean, why can't we have like a system preservation fund in the transit administration? Now, this probably isn't going to take care of all the backlog, but I think moving forward, we have to think in those terms. This is our infrastructure. We need to protect it. So I want to get you to comment on that.
Sure. I think that's an excellent point, Delegate Krim. And in fact, I think that's part of the reason that our committee and, that the body passed this, right, was so we would have some idea of what our system preservation or state of good repair needs were. And so I think that you could think of this fund that we're creating as a system, or this mandated funding that we're creating as mandated system preservation funds, because it is about meeting our system preservation needs, which is in MTA speak called state of good repair. So I think you're absolutely right. We always should and we must prioritize system preservation and state of good repair because it's how we keep Marylanders safe and keep the system functioning. And I think that's what this bill is about. Thank you.
Very good point. And I see no other hands. I do want to comment, Delegate Learman. One thing has changed since you presented this bill last year and we passed it. It's called the pandemic. That changed our lives, that chased us out of here before the Senate had time to come to their senses and pass this bill. So I would like to just have the committee, focus a bit as we move forward on this bill and as we move forward on other transportation and other needs, what the pandemic revealed to us around ridership in the state of Maryland, and who rides and who needs the rides the most, and who absolutely their job depends on those rides. And what we found is that the very system and systems that Delegate Learman is trying to address today were the most, I think, critical for our first responders, for our nurses, for the folks who worked in the hospitals, and the people that were really on the front lines with COVID patients. And if you look at the department's own reports about where ridership fell and where it didn't, because it couldn't, because people had no alternative. They didn't own a car to get in a car to go to work. So I just really appreciate the fact that you brought this bill back. I think the pandemic has helped us be more clear-eyed about the importance, particularly in certain areas of the state. But I do agree with you that this is a statewide bill with statewide implications, and every county in the state, really, I think, how many counties in the state does this?
24.
Does it cover all 24?
Yeah, because it also makes sure that all the locally operated transit systems and all the paratransit systems would benefit.
That's what I wanted to get at. It's all 24 counties in the state are impacted by this bill. So thank you very much. I appreciate having you back. We all appreciate seeing you. And good bill. And we're going to now send you back to your committee. And
thank you. Thank you very much. And also a shout out to all the amazing organizations, all 63 of them who've been so organized and putting in testimony. I'm here for all of them. So thank you.
Good. You're very welcome. All right, we're now going to move to House Bill 91. Delegate Jackson, who I have seen waiting patiently in the waiting room to come in and testify on his bill. This is the police athletic. Yeah. Delegate Jackson.
Hello, Madam Chair McIntosh, Vice Chair Chang, and members of the Appropriations Committee. Thank you for having me. This is my first time addressing the for the record, my name is Delegate Carl Jackson, here in support of HB 91. HB 91 would create a grant program of $500,000 to be administered through the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services to be awarded to the Police Athletic League, also known as PAL, programs throughout the state. Over the past few years, the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services has awarded a similar amount of money to PAL programs, but as part of a different overarching grant process. Creating a separate dedicated program exclusively for PAL will ensure that it is not affected by possible budget cuts in the future, or that money is somehow siphoned off to other programs. The Police Athletic League is a national organization that is run at the local level, which works to build positive relationships among youth, police, and the community by offering educational and extracurricular activities to participating youth with the goal of preventing juvenile crime and fostering mutual respect. PAL recreation centers give kids a safe place to spend their time while giving them constructive activities to further their development. Now, more than ever, this program is necessary to bridge, is a necessary bridge between youth and local police who actually do staff these programs in some jurisdictions and could go a long way in building trust for future generations. These benefits are even more pronounced in underserved communities of color where government investment has been lacking. My passion for this bill comes from a very personal place because I'm a proud product of the PAL program. PAL gave me a place to go to after school, on the weekends, and during the summer months that was a safe space for me and the kids in my community. During the school months after school, I would go to PAL where I would receive help with my homework and participate in athletics. On the weekends, PAL was the place to be. If I wanted to track my friends down, I knew I would find them there. During the summer months, all the kids in the community would be at the PAL from sun up to sundown, just being kids in a safe space. If it had not been for PAL, I can only imagine how I would have spent my time and what trouble I may have gotten into. PAL also offered opportunities for kids in the community to meet many of our hometown athletic heroes, something that was only made possible with the help of the PAL program. For me, I had the opportunity of a lifetime. As part of a Baltimore City-wide campaign to promote the PAL program, I was chosen along with 6 other kids from 6 different PAL centers to become a CAL's PAL and meet the Iron Man himself, Cal Ripken. If you want to know what that looks like, I would like to show you a picture. And if you can see, I'm right behind the Iron Man in the yellow shirt. And this was definitely an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to meet the Iron Man. Wouldn't have happened without PAL. And so I was glad to be a part of that opportunity.
You haven't changed a bit.
As I got older, I thought back on all the benefits of the PAL program. I realized that officers that ran the program had a major impact on our community. They knew all the kids and their families, which helped foster mutual respect. The officers looked like me and like the rest of my community, and we came to see them not just as law enforcement, but as trusted leaders in our community. They helped show us a different side of what good policing looks like. As we all know, 2020 has brought to light deep divisions, mistrust, and in some cases, hatred between communities of color and law enforcement. And while this body will be addressing law enforcement legislatively, and rightfully so, it is my opinion that it is this body's it is my opinion that this body must also do its part to foster understanding, healing, and trust. I believe that this bill will help with that. While I know this bill and the Pell program will not solve all of these problems, I do think it's a down payment that will put us on that path. Lastly, I am so proud to have retired Officer Craig Singletary as a part of my panel today. He was one of the officers who ran the Pell Center that I attended as a kid. On a personal note, to this very day, I have great respect for Officer Craig, as we called him, for the difference he made in my life and for so many others in the community that he served. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And first, let's see, are there any questions of the sponsor? Any questions? Sponsor. I see none. We have 3 folks here to testify in favor of the bill. And basically, this is not a bond bill. This actually carves out $500,000, am I correct, for the Pell program out of an existing budget. And so we have 3 people. I will call them up. Actually, I'll call Mr. Singletary first, since you introduced him a bit. And just remind all 3 that you have 2 minutes to give your testimony. Mr. Singletary, first of all,
ladies and gentlemen,
can
you hear me?
Or what? Huh?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, and we want to know, was he a good kid?
What's that, ma'am?
Was he a good kid?
Oh, yes, he was a very good kid. Very good kid. Very
Just
good
checking.
kid.
All right, go ahead.
I would like to say good afternoon to everybody, first of all. And the bill that he trying to get through would be an exceptionally help for the program for the kids around Baltimore City. Like Carl said, that when he came up through the PAL program, it was an after-school academic enrichment program for the kids to come through the center and make sure that, you know, their grades and their behavior was good. That's how it started out. And everybody thought the PAL program was just, you know, you come play basketball and whatever. So myself and Officer Wallace, my partner, made it more exciting for the kids. So what we did, we made an after-school academic enrichment program for all the kids. We went to their schools, made sure that their grades was up to par. If anybody had 70 or below, they wanted to play basketball, they couldn't do it because we went to their school, got their curriculum. They came to the program after school and made sure, hey, Carl, you got homework? No, I was thinking, I don't have no homework. Yes, you do. I got your curriculum right here. You got homework on reading, math, or history for the day. They couldn't get over on us as far as doing their homework and stuff. And it was it makes a difference to a kid where he can go to a place like a PAL program and have a safe haven with, you know, the adults there, and adults would, you know, interact with their families and everything. So, you know, I think this bill would be exceptionally good for the communities.
Thank you. Any questions? Let's move on to Mr. Rose. David Rose.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi. I worked with Delegate Carl Jackson on this bill for the last couple of months, and I'd like to just say that the Police Athletic League is an important program for building relationships between youth and police officers in the community. The PAL program allows for non-traditional law enforcement and youth interaction that often leads to mentoring and the breaking down of barriers that have become quite visible in recent years. In the beginning of the Great Recession in 2009, when funding priorities had to be made, many of these programs were deemed a low priority in tough budgetary times. Funding was cut and PAL facilities were either closed, had officers reassigned elsewhere, or both. At the time, this seemed like a prudent decision. However, a decade later, we now deal with the unforeseen consequences of what was probably the most important purpose of the program: building police, community, and youth relationships. We have since lost a whole generation of positive relationships. Hopefully, with the passing of HB 91, there will be sufficient funding to allow this program to stay viable and open. Only then can we move forward in rebuilding the relationships we took for granted in the past. And the Baltimore County Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 4 and the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police urge a favorable report on HB 91. On a secondary note, since the PAL centers have closed or officers were taken out of them in Baltimore County, our officers have taken it upon themselves to try to keep the interactions with the youth and the community going by forming our own baseball clinics, basketball clinics, football clinics, several times a year, pre-COVID, of course, just to keep those relationships going. And they've done their own fundraising and out beating the bushes, getting support from the businesses to help keep those relationships viable. And this program would actually go a long way in helping those take place without the officers out worrying about fundraising and donations, and can focus more on the youth in the centers. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more person, then I'll get to questions. Is Jeffrey Breslin here?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for your time. Thank you, Delegate Jackson, for your leadership. I come at this from two angles. One, having spent 10 years with the Cal Ripken Senior Foundation, helping to build that organization. I've seen Cal's Pals come to life in a whole new way. And two, as the president and CEO for Boys and Girls Clubs of Metro Baltimore, I'm here to share a little bit about what we have seen across the country where PAL programs have partnered with Boys and Girls Clubs to ensure that sustainability, so that, as Mr. Rose said, we are seeing it through decisions made through the greater Baltimore area as PAL programs left communities. We have an opportunity to fill those back in alongside youth organizations such as ourselves and many others, while also making sure the PAL name and the PAL reputation continues to live on in serving kids. Throughout Boys and Girls Clubs through the entire state, we have 35 clubs representing 8 organizations, many of which support and partner with local police athletic league and activity programs. And many of our kids, because of that, have a favorable view of law enforcement, yet have very real, very raw, very challenging conversations, which is what's needed to continue to build the trust between youth and law enforcement. We're really proud of the more than 54% of kids across the country, over 4 million kids, when asked, they said the Boys and Girls Club literally saved their life, along with the great programs like PAL that support their development. So we proudly support this, and we hope the committee and ask the committee to give it a favorable review. And thank you again, Delegate Jackson, for standing up and sharing his own story and the impact of PAL in his life.
Thank you. And we do have a question, Delegate Bridges.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Jackson, once again for bringing this to this committee. I do remember the police athletic leagues when I was growing up, and you're right. I mean, the impact that they've had on individuals, especially somebody like me, has been great. And we still have one, at least in my district, West Kendrick Police Athletic League off of Dolefield, that, you know, I still go over and do a little something out of with some of the kids. I'm not that good in basketball, but I try my best. But actually, David answered my question. I mean, over the years, we've lost so many of these police athletic leagues throughout the state. I would hate to see us lose any more. I realize there are 35, but does anybody know the original number before we had all these cuts? The 35 is the number that I was actually looking for across the state. But, you know, I just realized we lost way too many of these police athletic leagues over the years.
Baltimore City had 26.
Do you know how many we have now?
I think it's something down to 12, 13.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Delegate Jackson for bringing this bill and for his advocacy and sharing his experience. I do agree. I think we need to ensure that we have and provide our youth with as much support and wraparound services as possible. What I'm curious to find out as far as the PAL program, I know some of the folks that testified shared that the PAL program offers mentorship, you know, after school programs, academics, etc. And I'm curious to find out, because we're talking about $500,000 here. How is that separate from, let's say, the work that educators, counselors, behavior specialists, restorative justice practitioners who are doing this right now with students after schools, having mentorship programs, don't have the kind of support that we're talking about here, and are doing it for free, and are quite frankly trained and skilled to deal with youth, particularly youth with disabilities, but aren't getting the kind of support. I guess I'm trying to understand, how is this different from what is being done right now from really good Samaritans who aren't getting the support and know how to approach and deal with our kids? And, you know, if you all could just sort of expound on what it is that the PAL program does outside of what you described, which to me sounds like what there are folks out there who are doing it right now. So what else does the Police Athletic League, what it has done, what it plans on doing? I guess what I'm hearing is something that is already being done by people who aren't being supported the way you all are here advocating for support.
Well, a lot of money that came from the PAL program was from the private sector. And a lot of professionals come into the centers to volunteer their time. It's been going on for, I started PAL in 1995, so, and it's been going strong since. But like Delegate Jackson said, you need extra to do the things that the community have to have for these kids to be able to come to the PAL Center, feel safe, do the right thing in their communities, and have a positive role model for those communities.
I would also add, Delegate, thank you for the question. This program has had a real strong impact on not only satisfying the things you just said, dealing with after school, helping out with homework, but also building a relationship between the community and law enforcement. Till this day, Officer Craig is retired, but I can't even see myself calling him Craig. It's just that respect that is just in me. And I want to see that duplicated among other communities so that we will have a more cooperation between the law enforcement and communities of color. So we won't have what we've been seeing, or at least put a down payment on what we've been seeing, on the news and things like that from happening. I feel like this program will bring more mutual understanding, as well as offer all of those wraparound services that you had mentioned.
I always say like this, would you rather have a Carl Jackson that was standing on a corner that didn't get help from his local community center? Or would you rather have a Carl Jackson that was out there robbing, killing, maybe carjacking, maybe walking down the street? You may be walking down the street and that Carl Jackson may come up to you and rob you. You never know. But it's a win-win situation when you help your community with your community associations and your community activities with young kids.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would just add that, I want a young Carl Jackson to be supported in every way possible. And I would not also view a young Carl Jackson as a criminal or someone capable of, inflicting harm, but rather someone that, we need to ensure we're affirming and supporting. And so I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't disagree. I think our youth need positive mentorship and role models. I think we also need to improve the relationship between law enforcement and the broader communities that they serve. And I hope we're not suggesting that somehow this bill would really, substitute for the real work that we need to do to build that relationship. But I guess I know some educators, I know some counselors, I know restorative justice practitioners, I know behavior specialists, both in my county and across the state, who are doing exactly what it is that you're saying right now. And I don't disagree that our youth need it. But what I'm also noticing is that they're not getting the kind of support and the kind of funds that you all are advocating for. And I'm not saying it's not needed, but they're doing this also out of their free time, out of the kindness of their heart, also recognizing that our youth have trauma and need support, right? And know how to deal with our youth. I guess what I'm trying to get is what is different from the PAL program that would offer something unique to our youth to ensure that they're getting as much from this PAL program as possible. And I think Delegate Carl Jackson is an excellent example of that. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying there are some people who are doing it and they're not getting support, and they're doing it for free and on their own time. And they're doing it in a way that, just does not leave our kids scarred and with trauma and any kind of negative feelings.
Delegate, we have people in the police department, and I'm going to speak for Baltimore County because I'm not in other different counties, that are doing great work and doing it on their own time and volunteering to do these programs, either, in the clinics I talked about earlier, and helping out with homework and things along those lines. But what this would give, instead of those being sporadically all over the county in different locations and times, this would give a constant place for kids to go to feel safe and then interact with law enforcement in a non-traditional law enforcement role. So now you're seeing that officer as Officer Dave. And then I used to bring my kids when they were smaller with me, so they would see me as, a father and somebody in a non-traditional police role, and be able to talk to, not in uniform on a street corner, in an enforcement type strategy. So this is to break down barriers and enhance the trust that you might have in the other things that you talked about. But there is a need here that has to be addressed. And the last decade of the funding that has been taken away in the closing of the centers has caused, or has been, a part of the breakdown in the relationships that we need to focus on and build. And these PAL centers are a great opportunity for this to happen.
Yeah, I'd just say that, certainly, you and I and children, kids of color have had different experiences with law enforcement. And I would agree that, we want to ensure they get that mentorship, but also understanding what that means for certain kids. You talk about your own county, Baltimore County. Safety means something completely different for youths of color, for students of color, and when it comes to law enforcement. Jerome Liaison was just 11 years old when he was handcuffed for 23 minutes by a Baltimore County police officer and he's autistic, for in essence, banging his head against the desk after having an exchange with a student. And so that is how the officer responded to not only an 11-year-old boy, but someone with autism. And so what I'm getting at is, do we want to go down this route where we're spending $500,000 on a program about ensuring that youths get greater interaction with law enforcement, et cetera, to improve relationships? And I'm saying that there are other folks that are doing this, restorative justice practitioners, behavior specialists, et cetera, who know how to deal with our youth. And we don't have these kind of instances where those interactions lead to what I'm talking about, like the case of Jerome Liaison right in your own county. And so that's what I'm getting at. We have to really rethink what that model looks like and what safety means. And also understanding that safety means something completely different for different people, certainly for you and certainly for me and certainly for kids that look like me.
And if I may interject here, we're also debating two bills in separate committees on separate topics in this discussion. What our good delegate from Montgomery County is referring to as a bill that he and Delegate Wilkins have introduced in Ways and Means that has to do with police officers or security officers in school buildings during school time. And this is the PAL Center, which is a different program. I might also add, just so that we can move on to other people who have questions, that the money to pay for the very things that Delegate Acevera was referring to will hopefully appear after we override the blueprint bill, which had sufficient funding for wraparound services for just the kinds of supports that principals and teachers and students need, and parents in schools dealing with areas such as mental illness and other kinds of problems that they're dealing with. It also will bring back the after-school funding that was passed by this committee 6 years ago that has a gap in it because of the veto. So we're going to resolve this, but we're not going to resolve it at this moment. Delegate Keith Haynes has a question, followed by Delegate Jazz Lewis.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Delegate Jackson, thank you so much for this piece of legislation. Just before I get to my question, very succinctly, I just wanted to point out that we have a variety of resources that are available to find our youth wherever they may be along the spectrum. One size doesn't fit all, and one program is not exclusive to the other. I do know that of experiences of individuals who have come through the PAL system in Baltimore City, in other jurisdictions, and can testify as well as Delegate Jackson on the outcomes of those programs. But I also will mention to Delegate Acevera of yes.
I'm not going to debate all these.
I'm not going to debate it, Madam Chair. I'm not debating it.
So ask the question of the people who've come here to testify.
Sure.
Then we're moving.
The question that he had is somewhat similar to the one that I have to pose to the sponsor, and that is number one, how many potentially how much would the 500,000 service as far as PAL centers are concerned, and is it exclusive for PAL centers or similar programs like PAL, or is it specific to PAL only? That's the question I have.
Yeah, so the funds are specific to the PAL program.
Okay.
Which, if it's in the center, it would be the PAL center. But the purpose of it is to encourage jurisdictions to create the program, or if they have the program, to have the funds necessary to keep it going. So, and that's the purpose for the funds.
And Madam Chair, if I can, just one follow up. I know the program that it's coming out of, that's a grant based, so the locals will have to apply to the office for a grant for the continuation of the program, right?
Well, the governor's office of crime prevention, youth services, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Jackson, for the bill. A little known fact about me, most of my colleagues don't know, my mother's retired federal law enforcement. She did 30 years for the DEA. So I used to visit many of these types of programs across the region. I don't know if we have a PALS program in Prince George's. We do have the Explorer program that I imagine would function similar to what you have here. So my question is mostly tied to, I saw in the fiscal note that said there's 13 jurisdictions that have PALS. Do you know if Prince George's has a PALS program? I've never heard of it down in our neck of the woods. That's the first one. The second question, and you might have said this, just missed it through multitasking, was the officers that participate in the PALS program, do they go through any specialized programming in order to interact with those youth?
So to address your question about Prince George's, According to the analysis, Prince George's ran the PAL program for over 20 years. It says, however, the board of directors in the Prince George's County Police Athletic League were formed in 2016. So it was run by the Baltimore Police Department for over 20 years. And then Prince George's, the board of directors in the Prince George's County Police Athletic League was formed in 2016.
It sounds like you got it.
Yeah.
But we'll check it.
And the second question,
I'm sorry, what was the second
I
question?
missed that. The second part was just wondering, was there any, for the police that are interacting with the youth through the PALS program, do they get any special, quick training to interact with the young people at all? I was just curious.
Dave or Officer Craig, would you like to take that question?
Yes, we do. When I was in the program, we did get training through mental health and the health department, along with the police department. We did get training. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great bill.
Thank you.
And Delegate, I do think the fiscal analysis indicates that Prince George's may have the PAL program. It may go by another name, but we should look into that for you. Okay?
Yes, there's a lot of programs in different counties. They don't have the PAL program, but they do have offices within centers of their counties.
Right. Okay. Oh, Delegate Resnick, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a quick question for Delegate Jackson, because, excuse my ignorance, this program, PAL, is PAL a separately organized, incorporated nonprofit organization, or is it linked to other organizations?
I would say both. And I think, Jeff, you speak to the nonprofit side of that, but I do know in Baltimore County, it's run by Baltimore County Rec and Parks.
Because if it's a separately incorporated organization, I do have a concern about naming it in statute. And I know that nothing is completely forbidden, and we have, violated our own rules on occasion with regard to that. But if the Police Athletic League as a nonprofit organization should ever rename itself, go bankrupt, or otherwise, dissolve, having this organization in statute would create a conflict that would be problematic. We'd literally need to pass legislation to clean that up at some point if that should happen. So the concern is that we name a specific organization rather than potentially simply describe these kinds of services, fully admitting other organizations might apply for the grant as well, and less than $500,000 would go towards the PAL groups. But it would make it more equitable, but it would also make it more of a legitimate statutory language. And I want to know what you think about that.
Well, so the program is operated by local governments and organizations in conjunction with the National Police Athletic Activities League. And so also the governor has been putting money in the budget for programs such as this that could benefit from that other organizations could benefit from that, working with kids. But for me, I really feel very strongly that this PAL program will go a long way to not only creating a safe space, but also work towards building a healthy relationship between communities and the police department.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll have to see. If it is underneath a national group, then we'll follow up on that. Okay? Delegate Resnick, you okay? That's a question. All right, thank you. All right, that concludes the bill hearing. Good to see you, Delegate Jackson. Hope to see you again. Have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you for those of you who came to testify. We appreciate you being here.
Welcome, man.
You're very welcome. We're now going to move to House Bill 216, Delegate Valentina Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Following up on the good Delegate Jackson with concerns for our youth, House Bill 216 makes critical improvements to what we currently have as Maryland's college tuition waiver for youth experiencing homelessness. In 2014, Maryland led the nation when we created this waiver, and it was created with unanimous bipartisan support. It has truly been life-changing for the homeless youth, and it's opened doors for these bright students who otherwise might be locked into generational poverty. As co-chair of the Joint Committee on Ending Homelessness and a member of the Governor's Second Generation Poverty Commission, the findings have been clear that education makes the difference between a lifetime trajectory of economic struggle and homelessness versus a lifetime of job preparedness, readiness, and independence. The bill before you today is because our well-intentioned law, and we see this happen, we intend a law, it goes into progress, we've experienced some unanticipated implementation issues, and it served to really undermine the legislator's original intent to our promise to these homeless children. And at this time, it's even more critical that we address the shortcomings in the bill for the homeless youth because of the pandemic and the crisis that they're facing. It threatens even more their ability to get into college. And the pandemic is only worsening the inequitable access to college, and the hardships are falling disproportionately on Black youth and youth of color. So this bill responds to the current implementation challenges and will bring our current law in line with other states. Other states started to follow us, and now we need to try to follow them to straighten up these implementation issues. And it will ensure that our tuition waiver provides access to higher education and a pathway out of poverty for these youth who overcome the immense challenges of being homeless and still make sure that they're college ready, which I think we all agree is a feat in of itself. So let me see if I can work with my technology here. Sorry, with me. Sorry, Madam Chair, I have 3 screens up and I thought I was doing well today. I think Cherie was going to try to help me by putting up a slide for you all to see. If we could just briefly walk through the bill. So it's not as complicated as it appears. The first change, are you able to share it, Cherie, at all, or you'll have it in your packet? Well, we were trying with technology. The first change was going to repeal a requirement that we verify the student's homelessness status annually. And then we have to fix this because the current requirement creates this catch-22 where students end up getting in and then they achieve some stable housing and then they lose the tuition waiver. And it creates a circle that clearly we didn't anticipate once they received the waiver that they would continue, because even if they get housing on campus, they shouldn't be considered not eligible for it. We didn't intend for this and we need to fix it. No other states with the homeless youth tuition waiver require annual verification. And Congress just passed legislation that eliminated the verification of homelessness for independent students on their FAFSA. So the other amendment is repealing Maryland's annual verification of the homeless requirement. It will protect the students. So once they qualify for the tuition exemption, they continue with it and they don't have to requalify each year, and brings us into best practices. The second is to repeal the eligibility requirement that the student be unaccompanied. Currently, the waiver law excludes youth who are experiencing homelessness, but if they're with a parent, if the parent, you'll hear testimony, is living with them in the car, they no longer meet the definition of unaccompanied youth. And some of them started to lose this essential tuition exemption because a parent might end up with them, or they might end up back with a guardian yet still be homeless. If we remove this exclusion, it's not going to result in an overwhelming number of youth. The fiscal note indicates 720 students graduated from high school that were homeless in the last 5 years. And only about 20-something% of them end up being college eligible. So we're not talking about a huge increase in the number of students that will be able to avail themselves of this. The bill also creates, I think what's really important, an application and appeal process. Currently rely on staff at the institutions to apply the law and to proactively go out and find these youth. As a consequence, there's been misapplication and inconsistent application at the various institutions on who's aware, who's eligible, and how youth can become aware of it. So if we create an application and appeal process, we'll create a standardized process to ensure that students receive the assistance and those students that are eligible receive the assistance. And as the fiscal note indicates, institutions can do this. If anyone themselves has had to get their kid ready for college or apply to college, I mean, I've always said my husband and I aren't made it through law school, but we're not the smartest people, but certainly getting our kids through the college application process took both of us and almost became a full-time job. So we really need somebody within these institutions dedicated to helping these students navigate the difficult process of applying. In addition to enhancing the students' financial security, the bill addresses housing stability. And what we're going to do is require institutions to provide on-campus housing to give housing priority to these waiver students. Four-year institutions normally, don't have enough housing for everybody, but if we give priority to these waiver students, we'll ensure that they're not left out of housing and that they actually have a higher likelihood of finishing. Next, the bill clarifies that tuition includes charges for every term, the fall, winter, and spring and summer. This really codifies the intent that we had for full-year students year-round to be able to get the waiver support. And the bill allows students to keep the waiver when they're transferring institutions. This protects the students against some of the bureaucracies that exist and when they try and transfer between 2- and 4-year institutions, and it's going to eliminate delays and risks that they drop out or don't continue. The bill provides greater transparency by requiring institutions and Maryland Higher Ed to report on the number of students requesting it, the number that are being given it, and the number that are being denied. This is data that we clearly need for this important population, and they'll submit copies of their application and appeal forms. So the overall increase in oversight will help ensure the integrity of us implementing the law. After I put the bill in, we did find the need for some additional amendments and working with the groups. So the committee does have those. The first amendment pertains to verification of the homeless status for waiver eligibility. It specifies that a youth must have been verified as homeless during the 24 months prior to application for the waiver. And it lists the entities that will provide the verification. And this technical fix then conforms our law to the other states and recent federal legislation that amended the homeless verification process for independent students on the FAFSA. So that's an additional amendment to what before the bill was drafted. My second amendment creates a liaison within the financial aid offices or other offices. And this will be a single point of contact for homeless students, and it doesn't impose a cost on the institutions. Existing staff can cover it. This liaison will support the students in navigating the waiver process, accessing their vital records and resources. And the students in this situation frequently complain that finding the resources and getting in is too difficult. Finally, I'm offering an amendment that requires data to be reported by the institutions and MHEC, and that it be disaggregated by demographic information. Analyzing the students' demographics in this homelessness situation is crucial to monitoring whether the waiver is truly equalizing educational access by supporting Black youth, youth of color, trans youth, intersex youth, gay, lesbian, and bisexual youth. If the schools don't collect this data, we won't be able to tell if we're hitting the targeted populations with respect to homeless youth. Just want to touch on the fiscal impact. This is going to bring the promise of higher education to some of the students that need it the most. And I've already mentioned most of them aren't able to enroll. So we're talking about a small number that will be added into the waiver as we have it now. There's an additional chart in my written testimony that shows the number of homeless youth granted each year for 2-year and 4-year institutions. And as you can see, the amount of aid that we've given out so far has been relatively modest. It represents only the tuition, the mandatory fees, not room and board. and it really depends on how many credits the student's taking. The number of waiver students has only increased incrementally each year. So the available data shows the first 4 years and includes both the new waiver recipients and those who were receiving the waiver for subsequent years. So we can expect in the first cohorts of youth that there'll be some inevitable attrition and incremental changes in whether they complete the whole 4 years or 2 years. So with respect to the fiscal note, it really is a fiscal note on the universities. It's not a fiscal note on the state budget. The University of Maryland spends almost $17 million a year on tuition remission for employees and their dependents. So they have an ability to balance their mix of tuition waivers. They do it already for those that are dependents of their employees. So increasing the number of students with these amendments is manageable. It's something that I think we should celebrate. The costs are important investments to their future. We know that this is going to break the generational cost of poverty and the cost that they'll have to our system in the future. And supporting these youth, these are very special youth. If you're homeless, you make it into college, these are the youth that really are going to be our future with respect to changing our environment, changing our client, changing the way we govern, being our future leaders. So it removes some of the barriers for our most needed students. And I really thank you. Madam Chair, if I could just for a minute for the purposes, today's the maiden voyage. I'm very proud for President Felicia Williams, who's the new president for Prince George's Community College. She's the 9th president of the community college. I mean, her commitment to diversity and higher education is significant. She really gets at the heart of what motivates and engages these young adults. Prior to coming to Prince George's County, she served for nearly 22 years at the Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. And I'm just so pleased that she could be here today with the personal experiences at Prince George's Community College. Brian Watkins is here, and he's the founder at the University of Maryland College campus for Success. He's going to give you specific examples of why our statute isn't attaining what we intended. I hope Dejanay could stay. Dejanay experienced homelessness. She was going to have to leave at 3, but I can't tell if she's still in the panel or not. Hopefully she'll be here. Rachel White from Advocates for Children and Youth. Everybody needs somebody to play the bat up or the cleaner batter up for them. So I have Ingrid Lawfren here. If she could go last, she'll be able to answer all your questions. She's the director of Homeless Youth Initiative at the Homeless Persons Representation Project. And you have a letter of information from the University of Maryland system. I think they've got some inaccuracies in there, and she'll address those concerns for you. Madam Chair, I'm excited to bring this to our committee for this very important population and hoping we can move forward quickly and swiftly to make sure these homeless youth can get into college.
Thank you very much, Delegate Valentina Smith, for presenting House Bill 216. The committee will take questions from members of the Appropriations Committee. The first question will be posed by the gentleman representing Western Maryland, Delegate Mike McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this forward. I just want to talk about what exactly are we talking about? How much population are we really talking about? When you've got, I think it said 299 foster, 124 unaccompanied youth. Did I hear you right? You said it was like 20% of these people have actually qualified through.
Yep. Yeah, Delegate, we've worked together so long on this select committee on ending homelessness and second generational poverty. I thank you for just taking a minute to pause on that. Right now, 720 students we know graduated because by federal law, K through 12 is required to have somebody assigned to and following homeless students. So out of the 720, 20% or fewer will probably end up being college ready and eligible. And then of that number, not all will make it through the entire 4 years. So it's not a huge number of students. And in the other chart that you have, you'll see that so far, since we passed the original waiver, only 29 students have availed themselves of it all the way through.
So thank you. But, a lot of times there's legislation that is putting one community over another. It just seems to me that we're really just supporting one community. we're not hurting another community. And ultimately, if they can get the education that we hopefully they will, this can turn into home ownership, this could turn into generational wealth, and then even entrepreneurship. And so, at the end of the day, it just seems to me that this is the hope we have for all. And it's such a small amount that I'm not sure why we would not know why. I can't come up with a reason why we wouldn't want to advance this. Isn't that so?
That's so, and I thank you for the bipartisan support.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee for the bill sponsor? Seeing none, we'll move next to the witnesses. We have a series of witnesses who are joining us this afternoon, and we welcome each and every one of them. First, we have Mrs. Felicia Williams, president of the Prince George's Community College. And to all the witnesses, as a reminder, there's a 2-minute limit on your testimonies. And thank you very much. Madam President.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman McIntosh in absentia, Vice Chair Chang, and committee members. As the president of Prince George's Community College, we strongly support House Bill 216, which will streamline the process to allow for tuition exemptions for foster and homeless youth across the jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. The changes noted in the bill related to the existing tuition waiver and its provisions related to unaccompanied youth ensure that these new provisions will fulfill its promise to provide a pathway for our foster and homeless youth. The tuition exemptions for our recipients provide life-altering opportunities to many high school graduates through their pursuit of post-secondary education for degree completion, licensure, and/or skill certification. This pursuit constitutes a material benefit to these students as well as to our state. Taking full advantage of the available assistance will also allow these students to complete the attainment of a college degree or an enhanced credential and to provide a sustainable living wage. Though House Bill 216 makes a number of technical and clarifying changes to the definitions of homeless youth, establishes that youth determined to be homeless youth during the year prior to applying are still eligible for the tuition waiver, and amends the tuition waiver law to include accompanied homeless youth in addition to already eligible unaccompanied homeless youth, we don't anticipate that this would create significant operational challenges, and we expect that the cost would continue to be remarkably low. At Prince George's Community College in particular, we have seen over the past 3 consecutive academic years that the number of applications for students, homeless and foster care students, has pretty much remained stable. In 2018-19, there were 48 applications. In 1920, there were 47. And in 2021, there were 42. We have seen that after the implementation of the law, we have grown from 31% of those applicants enrolling to 46% prior to the pandemic. In this year, this unprecedented year, we still see 24% of those students persisting in their education. I think that is admirable, and I think it would be unattainable without the types of resources and support being provided. Our collective goal is to provide opportunity and access for every Maryland student to pursue higher education. It is of the utmost importance to ensure that these students have the opportunity to take advantage of every resource, every financial resource available to assist our students' path so that they too can achieve the goals and the aspirations that we all share. So while there may be small increases, we see this as an investment, and it is not insurmountable. Rather, it is a stepping stone. And so we hope that you will join us in rendering your favorable support for House Bill 216.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
President Williams, for your testimony. The committee will hear questions from members of the Appropriations Committee, and the gentleman from Baltimore County is recognized, Delegate Maggiani. Okay, Delegate Maggiani is having some technical difficulties. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, President Williams, for being here. Next, we will hear testimony from Mr. Brian Watkins, University of Maryland College Park. Mr. Watkins, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair McIntosh, Vice Chair Chang, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today and give my testimony in support of House Bill 216. My name is Brian Watkins, and I'm here today in my capacity as the founder and chair of Fostering TERP Success at the University of Maryland College Park. The views I express are my own and not necessarily those of the university. We created the Fostering TERP Success program 2 years ago to provide support to and eliminate barriers for students who have experienced foster care, are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and those who have no network of family support. I work closely with each of these students and understand the challenges they face. I also know their amazing strength and resilience in the midst of immense trauma. I have a few examples of students who've been denied eligibility due to technicalities. One includes a student who has experienced homelessness since high school when he and his mother lived out of a car in Anne Arundel County. She didn't work, and he was the sole provider for both of them by working a part-time job. He doesn't qualify for the waiver because he's considered a dependent and therefore does not meet the definition of unaccompanied. HB 216 will remedy this issue. Another example is a student who transferred to the University of Maryland from Prince George's Community College. He was eligible for the waiver at Prince George's Community College, but is having trouble qualifying for the waiver at UMD. HB 216 will fix this also and ensure that a student retains their eligibility at any other public institution in which they enroll. As Delegate Valentino Smith noted, there are students who are homeless and deserve the waiver, but are not able to access it. And unfortunately to our students, the perception is that our institutions are looking for a way out rather than a way in. HB 216 will remedy so many of the burdens and barriers they face. Homelessness is homelessness. Unaccompanied by definition or not, there is shared trauma and experience of poverty. We also cannot ignore the fact that the youth most impacted by foster care and homelessness are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. We also know that the degree completion rate for foster care youth is significantly lower than that of all other students. Only 2% of those who enter higher education earn a degree. And the data for homeless youth is elusive. The national data does not yet exist.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins. If you could summarize.
Yep, absolutely. That a student who is homeless makes it this far should be celebrated, and we should do all we can to ensure their success. I ask you today to please support HB 216 and provide even better legislation that opens the doors for youth experiencing homelessness, reduces the immense burden of debt, and provides a fighting chance to escape poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins, for your oral testimony. You also have written testimony that's submitted in the committee. If we could do this, the rest of the witnesses are also in favor of this legislation. They both have written and oral. So next we'll move on to make the announcement. Is Ms. Dejanay Day here? Just wanted to check to make sure that we did not miss her. Ms. Dejanay Day.
Vice Chair, if I may, she just let me know that she's joining right now. She might just be in the waiting room. Thank you so much for your patience.
Sure, we wanted to give her an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. She has some personal experience that will be significant for the committee to hear, I think.
Okay. Well, if we could do this to give her some time to get in the waiting room or get into the Zoom, if we can move on to Miss Rachel White, Advocates for Children and Youth. Miss White.
Yes, good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Rachel White, and I am the Child Welfare Policy. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to express my testimony in support of House Bill 216. So, as you know, not only do the expansions in the current bill apply to youth experiencing homelessness, but also to youth involved in the child welfare system. The specific expansions that apply to youth in the child welfare system include access to a standardized application for the tuition waiver in addition to an appeals process. It makes absolutely no sense that a youth can apply to one school in Maryland, receive the tuition waiver, a second youth with the same circumstances can apply to a second school and not receive the tuition waiver. So it's imperative that the application process is standardized. It is also imperative that the state does all things necessary to mitigate educational barriers and educational attainment for youth experiencing foster care and youth experiencing homelessness. The National Foster Youth Institute reported, as Brian indicated, that only 2% of youth experiencing foster care who attend four-year universities actually graduate. And this is for a variety of reasons. It could be competing priorities, repeated cycle of homelessness, dealing with past and present traumas, in addition to lack of resources and supports on college campuses to meet their goals. So this bill has the potential to increase graduation rates for youth experiencing homelessness and youth in the foster care system, as it does provide an appeals process, a grievance process when youth are denied the tuition waiver. It gives them a potential second chance of going to school tuition free if the university has made a mistake in their decision. Delegate Valentino Smith alluded to the cost savings to the state by investing in education. It should be noted that those with a college degree are 3.5 times less likely to be impoverished, 5 times less likely to be in prison, and it saves the state $82,000 per pupil. So in closing, not only does this bill provide a gateway to education for youth experiencing homelessness and foster care, it saves the state's money, and it also reduces racial disparities, as Brian indicated, portion represented in homelessness and youth involved in the child welfare system. So for the reasons stated above, I ask that you issue a favorable report on House Bill 216.
Great. Thank you very much, White. Thank you very much, Ms. White, for your testimony. And next we'll move back to Ms. Dejane Day. If Ms. Dejane Day was able to join us, if she could provide her testimony.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Delegate Valentino Smith, and the representatives of the committee. Again, my name is Dejane Day. I apologize in advance for my tardiness, and I am also in support of House Bill 216. I've had personal experience with using a tuition waiver when I was in college at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I actually struggled to receive the waiver the first year I was homeless due to the application process. I kept trying to receive the waiver for my whole sophomore year, and with help from my mentors and the support from the shelter I was staying with during my college career, I was able to receive it my junior year. But there are some youth that are not so lucky to have the support that I had. If there was a liaison for situations like this, that I would have probably had a better understanding of the waiver, and it would have not taken me a whole school year to get the waiver. During this time of a pandemic, where some schools are fully virtual, it is hard for a youth who is going through homelessness to receive stable housing while trying to find a way to attend school virtually. This bill, will allow homeless youth the option to attend school, prevent you from searching for alternative ways to survive, and break the stigma of how homeless youth are viewed currently. For example, homeless youth are sometimes viewed as being lazy, not wanting to work, or not wanting to pursue a higher education. My story has a bittersweet ending because I made it through the trials and tribulations to get my degree, but my other peers were not able to due to the challenges of getting the waiver, not knowing about the waiver, or the mental strain of it all. My story has a new beginning. I am now a mother of one. I graduated on time, thanks to the waiver and with the proper guidance. Now, I am a co-chair, a youth advocate of a program called the Youth Action Board in Prince George's County, Maryland, which advocates for inner youth homelessness in Maryland and within my community. There can be more people like myself who take their education to the next level with the support from a tuition waiver. And overall, the tuition waiver bill will bring up increased awareness to the topic of homeless youth and young adults in the state of Maryland. I will end with this. Education is the building block that can ensure the success of a youth. This bill will add a liaison for support applying for the waiver and make the application process clearer and less of a burden for potential students. The youth will be able to focus on other areas of life, such as mental health, employment, and recreational activities. Please make sure students struggling with housing instability during and after COVID-19 can access education. Again, I strongly encourage you to support House Bill 216, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Day, for being here. We are glad that you were able to join us. Next, we'll move on to the last witness for this bill, Ms. Ingrid Lofgren, Homeless Persons Representation Project. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Chang and members of the committee. My name is Ingrid Lofgren. I'm Director of the Youth Initiative at Homeless Persons Representation Project, which is a nonprofit legal services organization. I had the pleasure of working on the legislation in 2014 that created the tuition waiver for youth experiencing homelessness. If there are any questions about the history of the provisions that we now are seeking to approve, to improve upon, I'm happy to take those questions. I do want to briefly address a letter of information that the University System of Maryland has submitted. Respectfully, it includes some inaccuracies that I'd like to clear up. So USM incorrectly asserts that this bill institutes a broader definition of homelessness than is currently codified in the tuition waiver law, and that applies to the FAFSA. That's not correct. This bill actually does not change the definition of homelessness that is in the current waiver law, and that is also used in the FAFSA context. USM also asserts that requiring institutions to set up a verification and appeals process would be unduly burdensome and costly. They already are responsible for verification, and this legislation doesn't change that. So verification of homeless status and eligibility has been happening at the institution level for the past 7 years since the homeless youth waiver was established. This legislation does add an appeals process. Financial aid offices already handle some aid-related appeals, and the fiscal note indicates that they would likely be able to manage appeals under this bill with existing resources. The appeal process really just ensures basic due process and will help address ongoing inconsistent and incorrect implementation of the waiver law. I would just add, in addition, emphasize that some of the key changes in this bill are that it repeals the requirement that students have to verify homelessness annually and repeals the eligibility limitation to unaccompanied students. Maryland is the only state in the country that has a homeless youth tuition waiver that has an annual verification requirement, and that only makes the waiver available to unaccompanied students. So we're really just conforming Maryland law to best practices. On-campus housing prioritization, having a liaison in the financial aid office, having an application and an appeal process. These are all very common practices in other states that have not been problematic there, and that really will improve upon our law and not cause an unmanageable fiscal burden or administrative burden, as you've already heard.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Appreciate you being here. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for any of the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing for House Bill 216.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. We're going to now move to House Bill 486, Delegate Solomon. Delegate Solomon, you have two bills. Let's begin with 486.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And I'd just like to recognize my panel. I've Patrick Moran, President AFSCME Maryland 3, and Relford Matthews, who is a member of AFSCME's executive board and a mechanical engineer at UMES. So I appreciate the committee having them here with us as well. So I wanted to present House Bill 486, which is a common sense bill that would end the patchwork and what I think many would agree is an inefficient system of campus by campus collective bargaining among 12 university system of Maryland institutions, the centers, and regional centers. So under the current system of collective bargaining, more than about 30 individual contracts must be negotiated throughout the system, and ultimately those then get approved by the Chancellor and the Board of Regents. So what this bill would do essentially is replace that somewhat duplicative and inefficient system with the same collective bargaining setup that we have for the rest of the state government. So as many of you know, for all state agencies, which literally run the gamut of our child welfare services to correctional officers to agricultural inspectors and water quality scientists, there's one master agreement that AFSCME negotiates directly with the state, and then multiple side agreements can be negotiated for those individual agencies. And so essentially, that's exactly what this would do. It would create sort of one unified agreement with the ability to negotiate side agreements or agreements that are specific to certain issues that come up at institutions. You know, like Frostburg may have more snow days than other institutions, or parking, which is a significant issue at the University of Maryland College Park. You're going to hear a lot from the folks who are with us today, from the system and from individual campuses about the individual presidents and campuses having full autonomy. But the reality really is that, as I mentioned earlier, these contracts already have to be approved by the Board of Regents, and individual campuses regularly have to seek approval when they're in the process of negotiating these local agreements with the board and with the chancellor and with the staff at USM. You know, for example, there's things all the time that locals are told that they can't negotiate. You know, at Bowie State, they tried to negotiate fair share language and were told because this is something that USM controls, they couldn't negotiate it locally. At College Park, there's been issues over whether wages can be negotiated. Again, this is something that USM typically takes purview over. And at UMES, there were also issues with wages. So what happens is we have an inability for these locals to bargain with their local institutions because USM says this is an issue that we have, and the locals tell them we can't deal with it. And this was really brought into stark contrast earlier this year. We were dealing with a lot of the health and safety issues over COVID, and many of you participated in a lot of the hearings and have heard from many of the frontline workers. There was often a mishmash of health and safety regulations and procedures and policies in place at different institutions, again, throughout the year as we were facing COVID. In fact, and you'll see there's a link to it in my testimony, there's actually 75 different personnel and human resource procedures laid out by the USM and the Board of Regents that the Chancellor has adopted to govern system-wide. And you're also going to hear issues later about, you know, how this bill could potentially jeopardize national accreditation. Again, you know, we are really building off a model that USM already has in place. There's a system-wide policy for social media. There's 85 pages of system-wide procurement policy. And there is, of course, a system-wide policy for the use of fund balances, which often we deal with as appropriators who set the budget. I wanted to read you just a passage from the fund balance policy. It says, an institution may request the use of unrestricted fund balance to pay for a project or initiative's spending needs by forwarding a request to the Chancellor and Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance or the Board of Regents as spending approval requirements dictate. Again, if we're looking at you know, institutional presidents and CEOs, they still have to get budget approval. They have to get approval for their fund balance directly from the Board of Regents and from USM. You're also going to hear later from some of the USM officials about the education articles that we as a General Assembly had laid out. If you look in those specific articles, there are absolutely references. There's numerous references to the power of the Chancellor and the Board of Regents and USM as a whole to set policy for the entire institution. It talks about the USM in consultation with presidents shall establish general standards and guidelines governing the appointment, compensation, advancement, tenure, and termination of all faculty. Talks about USM and the Chancellor's responsibility for budget. So again, you know, I want to just say that this is not a bad thing for a system that collectively is meant to educate our you know, best and brightest in our state to really you know, embolden and improve our state's economy. It's a good thing that we have collective policies that govern our entire system. And I point this out because, again, you're going to hear shortly that, you know, this bill would somehow undermine this autonomy and the ability for our presidents to act really as CEOs and unilaterally. And again, based on the system that we already have, that's not the case. So what this does is, again, it tries to bring some more order to what is a complicated system. There's a process of collective coalition bargaining that some institutions voluntarily get into. And so what you have is some institutions allow USM to negotiate on their behalf, and others negotiate individually. And so fundamentally, this legislation is about fairness. If this system is good enough for our incredibly diverse state workforce, I think, and I hope you will too, that it should be good enough for our university system. There's no fiscal note with this bill. We actually think by, again, unifying the collective bargaining system so that each individual institution doesn't have to have its own representatives, we may actually be saving some money. So with that, I would urge a favorable report and appreciate your time and consideration of the issue.
Hey, Guy.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Delegate Solomon, for presenting House Bill 486. Are there any questions from members of the Appropriations Committee for Delegate Solomon? The gentleman from Western Maryland is recognized, Delegate Mike McKay.
Thank you, Delegate, for bringing this back again. So let me get this right. So right now, if I'm working in Frostburg and my job duties are the exact same job duties in College Park, I possibly am not being paid the same, or I'm not having the same employment agreements. Is that what you're saying? I mean, how could that have standed so long? I mean, I'm surprised this bill hadn't passed many years ago. Regardless of where you are, we had Speaker Cass Taylor of One Maryland. And if we're going to be One Maryland, shouldn't our higher of education employees be paid One Maryland, and the same structure should be the same? Now, don't get me wrong, in Frostburg, you know, they shouldn't be the highest paid either. But if they're doing the exact same thing, why isn't, I just don't understand why this took so long to come.
Well, Delegate, thank you for the question. I would agree with you wholeheartedly, and I think you'll hear from some of the folks who are on the front lines who would say the same thing. And again, you know, our state workforce, it's the same. We don't pay we don't pay somebody working in Western Maryland less than somebody who's working in Montgomery or in Prince George's or on the Eastern Shore, especially for the same job. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon, for bringing this robust discussion to this important issue. Does this also have to do with when COVID was going on, were the different campuses all implementing different approaches to the protection of their employees or application of PPE? I mean, was it disjointed, and is that part of the issue?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate. So I think this is certainly the events of last summer and fall have, I think, brought this a little bit more into stark contrast. This is an issue that, as Delegate McKay said, has been really ongoing for a long time. But we did see sort of piecemeal policies, across the board. I think it's improved. I don't want to say that the USM wasn't trying, but I think initially there was a really scattershot rollout, and I think you'll hear from the AFSCME folks that oftentimes a lot of campuses say we can't negotiate health and safety standards. That is laid out in USM's personnel policies that I mentioned, and that is something that the Chancellor and the Board of Regents make the decisions on, and individual campuses say, our hands are tied, that's not something we can negotiate with you on.
Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Beitzel. Yep. Unmute.
Wrong button. There you go.
Hey.
I'm there. All right. Delegate Solomon, sounds like you want to make everything equal. Then if that's the case, why is the tuition different at all these various universities? And if we make everything equal, why don't we have to pay the same tuition at Frostburg as we do at University of Maryland? Is the revenue equal? So if you want to make all payments equal, then shouldn't the revenue be equal and we just get everything equal? I mean, there's there's differences in the value and the degree of the education that you go to. Maryland is recognized, University of Maryland College Park is recognized the flagship campus. So, people pay more tuition there than they do in Frostburg and other things. So it seems to me that these college presidents are in a much different position at each one of these institutions, and they should have some discretion to make things and negotiate things differently than every other university in the system. So don't you think that's so?
So I would say this, USM, and it's good to see. I wish we could be together in person. So USM already controls and has a tremendous influence over the budget process. They're the ones that present. Technically, they're the ones that present each individual campus's budget, and they already have a lot of influence over the wage standards. We're not saying that individual side agreements couldn't be negotiated and things couldn't be, wouldn't all, not everything would have to be uniform and standard. Certainly there are differences among our state workforce, but again, for somebody who is doing, as Delegate McKay said, the same job, what we don't want really is a Hunger Games style where people are saying we don't want to work for one campus or we don't want to go to this institution because they can't pay us the same or they can't do this when the job is ostensibly the same at each individual campus.
Oh, I thought it was.
Delegate Beitzel, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okie dokie. We're going to call up first the two members that you mentioned on your panel. Delegate Solomon, is that right? That'd be Patrick Moran, and is it, who's the other one?
Matthews.
Yes, Mr. Matthews.
And I think we've got Secretary King here as well, too.
Secretary King. Well, all right. We're going to call these in the order. I also have Herbert Dennis. Is Herbert Dennis here? All right. Well, let's call these.
I am here, madam.
Okay. I'm going to call in the order I just announced, and everybody has 2 minutes to present your testimony. So let's start with Patrick Moran, AFSCME. I see him. He's here.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just realized that. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Patrick Moran. I'm the president of AFSCME Council 3. We represent almost 30,000 state and university employees in every legislative district across Maryland, including 6,500 USM or University System of Maryland employees at 9 different campuses. AFSCME has a single and efficient contract with the state of Maryland, where we represent over 20,000 workers in 2 personnel systems in more than 20 state agencies and at over 700 work sites across Maryland. This model is efficient and works in our complex state system, as Delegate Solomon mentioned. By comparison, our members in the University System of Maryland with 1 personnel system bargain multiple contracts at only 9 campuses, resulting in 15 contracts negotiated for only 6,500 workers. Furthermore, our members are never able to bargain collectively with the entity that creates the policies and the guidelines, and that is the University System of Maryland and the Board of Regents. This legislation allows an employee organization that represents multiple bargaining units on different campuses to bargain one master agreement with the USM. In recent years, the USM has consolidated its operations. Its 10-year strategic plan lays out that it should, and I quote, seek out and pursue at the system-wide level or encourage the institutional development of new opportunities that can streamline or improve services for all USM institutions, such as the development and dissemination of umbrella agreements, intellectual policy waivers, and service-related research opportunities. We have seen the legislature take approaches to create greater synergy with the USM, such as the Empower program between the University of Maryland, Baltimore and University of Maryland College Park. These same themes should be available to workers as well. Our legislation creates a greater synergy and allows for an umbrella labor agreement with the USM to work through issues. When the USM was founded in the late 1980s, Governor Schaefer's top aide, Dave Iannucci, who wrote the law creating the system, was quoted in the Baltimore Sun, and he stated, "We are all on this boat together." We anticipate this legislation to remedy the concerns we have raised, and we are asking for your support on this legislation and for a favorable report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Matthews.
Good evening, members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Ralph Matthews. I'm a maintenance mechanic at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and it is my alma mater. I come to you today because we need HB 486 to pass so that we can actually bargain working conditions with the USM, because the USM sets the guidelines for policy, guidance, and pay. In the USM, we have one contract. In the USM, we should have one contract, not 15 separate contracts. The state employees who work for the state of Maryland, like social workers or of Princess Anne or the correctional office in Westover, have one contract. Why shouldn't we? Currently within the USM, HBCUs are separate, but a long ways from being equal. Consolidating bargain so that the wages, working conditions, and health and safety issues are negotiated across the state will have the same positive effects on HBCUs, because standards and expectations are harmonized across all schools in the USM. Your support for House Bill 486 will help us lift our brothers and sisters out of poverty and create a standard that we all can live with. I hope that you find a favorable report for the House Bill 486.
Thank you very much. Let's go now to, is Mr. King here?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes. How are you, Mr.
Thank you. Doing well. Good to see you. Thank you, Chairwoman McIntosh and members of the committee for allowing me to join you today. Let me thank first Delegate Solomon for his leadership on this issue and Ms. Moran's leadership of AFSCME. I'm testifying on this bill in both my capacity as former United States Secretary of Education and also as the founder of Strong Future Maryland, advocacy organization focused on addressing systemic inequality. And we urge you to support this bill because we need a fair collective bargaining process for the employees of Maryland's higher education system. We are, as all of you know, in the midst of a national reckoning, a long overdue reckoning with issues of systemic racism and racial injustice. And it's time that we as a state turn rhetoric to reality as we grapple with that reckoning. And we have to realize that collective bargaining is often a tool to address racial and gender inequality. As Mr. Matthews points out, too often we've seen that HBCUs in the state have not been treated equally. That includes the employees not having equal opportunities and benefits to their colleagues in predominantly white institutions. This is an opportunity to rectify that. As Mr. Moran pointed out, there's also an opportunity here to remove some of the red tape and bureaucracy that gets in the way of protecting employees' rights and protecting employees' safety. And certainly, as Delegate Solomon pointed out, that's been made very clear during this COVID period. The bottom line is we need one negotiating table where everyone has a say, and we need a thriving and safe university system where equity, justice, and fairness prevail. And this bill helps to do that. I hope you all support HB 486.
Thank you so much. We'll now move to Mr. Dennis.
Madam Chair, I think he actually was here for the next.
He's on the wrong little sheet. Just remind me, okay, Delegate Solomon, will you? When we get to the
I think it's for Delegate Jacobs' bill.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I was wondering why the Kent County Commissioners had an opinion about this bill. So these are the folks that you have in favor. We now have, if I'm correct, a number of people who have signed up unfavorable. But before we do, I've got two questions of this panel, and I'll start with Delegate Bridges.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Solomon, for bringing this bill. And thank you to my colleagues for continuously shouting out my alma mater, Frostburg State University. Although this has nothing to do with Frostburg, is there maybe someone that can give sort of a concrete example of how members would be affected by this legislation?
Sure, I would be happy to comment on that. Look, I mean, as Delegate Solomon pointed out earlier, we have 15 different agreements. A housekeeper at UMES is a housekeeper at College Park, is a housekeeper at Frostburg. Why do we have different HR policies? Why do we have different grievance systems? Why do we have different ways in which we're negotiating leave and things of that, when those jobs, we do the fundamental foundational work at the colleges and at the campuses. Why is there such stark differences? We don't have that in a system with the state where we have a far more diverse population. We have a consistent agreement. We have a consistent rules and policies around things such as disciplinary matters or grievance matters. And, it is just out of whack at the university system.
And so those grievances would all fall under, I guess, the same sort of blanket, policy that will be negotiated, right?
Correct.
Gotcha. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just, before we go on, because these arguments go back and forth, from Mr. Morgan, I just want to clarify, it's something that Delegate Solomon alluded to, make sure I understand. So in the testimony against this, the system says the broad transfer of authority from the institutions to the university system affected by this bill will damage the institutions and undermine the president's legal role as the institution's chief executive officer. Delegate Solomon alluded to they're not really the chief executive officer, because often USM just comes in and overrides the negotiations and controls the negotiations anyway. Is that what I was understanding? Is that the case?
Yes, that's clearly the case. And we've seen that time and time again. Thank you for the question, Delegate. I have two great examples of that. One, first and foremost, is we negotiated, several years ago, a contract at University of Maryland, Baltimore. The contract was agreed upon between the management team and our negotiating team. The contract went out to ratification to our members. Our members ratified the contract, and then several weeks later, the USM came back, or management from UMB came back and said, no, the USM has disagreed with this. The Board of Regents has turned this down. We can't honor and respect this disagreement, which was incredibly disrespectful to the people that took the time and energy to, craft the agreement and work under, good faith terms and conditions to have the system do that. And the second most glaring example of that is we reached an agreement around a particular issue, which was fair share at the time, which was legal, with Bowie State University. And they said, okay, we're going to move this forward, and we're going to have an election amongst our members, not just our members, but every employee that was eligible around this issue. And I personally got a call from Carolyn Skolnick, who is the head of HR at USM, saying, you cannot do this unless you do it under our terms and the way we want to do it. And I'm sorry, but no one is going to tell our union how we are going to run our internal business, or accuse us of running things out of whack, or just dishonestly, which was basically the accusation. And so we didn't move forward on it because the USM had demands that the Bowie State University did not agree to, and we did not agree to with the USM. So we never moved forward on that. I mean, it was just clear. And, these are just two examples over and over again where we've seen the universities come to us and say, well, we can agree to this, but we have to go to the USM because they, at the end of the day, are the decision makers.
Thank you. I guess that does provide the clarity that the USM really is the overarching director of all the contracts anyway. So why not work with them? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to turn to the opponents. And speaking of Carolyn Skolnick, we'll have Carolyn Skolnick. And then after Carolyn, I'll be calling on Don Rhodes. So, Carolyn?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair McIntosh and members of the committee, also Vice Chair Chang. As I think I've already been introduced by Patrick Moran in a way that I would have preferred not to have been, but I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Human Resources at the University System of Maryland, and I do appreciate the opportunity to offer our thoughts on this bill. Under current law, it is the president of each public higher ed institution who has the authority to direct collective bargaining negotiations. This bill would affect a broad transfer of this authority at USM universities only, from the president to the chancellor, effectively to the Board of Regents. This bill also gives the union veto power over designating matters that might be particular to an institution and could be negotiated with the university's president. This will undermine the president's legal role as chief executive officer responsible for the day-to-day management of the university. There are also important practical reasons not to take away the president's control of negotiations and replace it with system-controlled collective bargaining. The USM has an independent personnel system that was deliberately not modified on a typical centralized merit system like the system run by DBM. Presidents are given flexibility to set salaries and working conditions to best meet the needs of their institution. As a result, the 12 USM universities have different recruitment, screening, and hiring procedures, performance management policies, academic and holiday calendars, work weeks, work schedules, starting pay, pay upon promotion, and shift differential. The university's mission, size, budget, and labor market all influence these decisions. Under centralized bargaining, how would you decide which university's practices would be favored and enforced system-wide? Are you going to look to the interest of Frostburg State University with only 171 AFSCME employees in a rural area with a low cost of living, or the University of Maryland College Park with nearly 4,000 AFSCME employees in an urban area with a high labor market? If consolidated bargaining is required under this bill, it will result in competition between the universities with perceived winners and losers, which will not be good for employees. For these reasons, we urge an unfavorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move through the opponents and then we'll take questions, if that's all right, committee. Don Rhodes, University of Maryland, Baltimore.
Good afternoon, Chair McIntosh and Vice Chair Chang and other members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today. I am Dawn Rhodes, Vice President for Administration and Finance at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. The majority of UMB's AFSCME employees are in my division. I would ask that we all keep in mind that we are discussing what is in the best interest of people, not union members, which is why UMB does not support HB 486. These individuals are our employees and we care deeply about them. I started at UMB in August 2017. In August 2018, I conducted focus groups with nearly 30% of our custodians. I did the same in 2019 with 60% of the facilities and operations staff. As a result of the conversation with our custodians, UMB raised the minimum hourly rate to $12.91 an hour from $12.06. The increase was made retroactive to July of 2018. 154 AFSCME employees received higher wages because we listened to what they said to us. Under the proposed bill, I can't even comprehend how we would be able to implement a 7% increase in the hourly wage rate for our employees. The implications for our sister institutions with fewer resources than UMB surely would find it problematic if we were all required to act in lockstep. I'm equally concerned to have UMB's employees combined with College Park's union members that number 3,300 compared to our 800. In a union negotiation, they would literally be the 2-ton gorilla in the room, potentially dwarfing the needs of others. No offense, Carlo. College Park is in a higher wage market than us in Baltimore. I fear being forced to fund wages higher than our Baltimore market, which would necessitate all wages and salaries to increase to avoid wage compression issues. I have a last point that I hope is not lost on anyone. Over 90% of UMB's custodians are people of color. 9 out of 94 of UMB's security guards are African American or Latinx. Nearly 18% of UMB's facilities and operations employees are people of color. Their voices are finally being heard. This proposed bill could silence them again. I would ask that the consideration of this bill be done through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I again respectfully register UMB's lack of support for House Bill 486. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lisa Early, Coppin State University.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair McIntosh and committee members. And I too thank you for the opportunity to testify before this committee this afternoon. I am Dr. Lisa Early, Chief Human Resources Officer at Coppin State University. And I want to go on record to say this bill is just not in the best interest of Coppin. We have 86 employees who are represented by collective bargaining with AFSCME, and their voice would absolutely be muted if they are to be heard among more than 3,000 College Park employees and 800 UMB employees. I can also share that recently when AFSCME was petitioning to bargain with Frostburg and College Park about health and safety conditions on their campus, our campus union expressed being very happy with the conditions on our campus, and in fact, wanted nothing to do with the matters that were taking place on the other campuses. So we have good labor relations on our campus, and we would like to keep it that way. Another perspective that I'd like to urge you to consider is that Coppin has a unique culture and a mission as an HBCU. What we need to fulfill our mission is much different than what other institutions may need at any given time. For example, performance evaluations is a bargainable issue. And at this time, Coppin is currently engaged in a PMP redesign process responsive to a climate survey conducted. This project is not even relevant at other campuses at this time. Another issue that has come up was parking rates as a bargainable issue. The demand for parking on our campus is not the same as it is for UMB, so parking rates are different. Since all institutions wouldn't need to bargain the same issues at the same time, bargaining for all institutions really creates more problems than it does solutions. This bill could conceivably impede Coppin's ability to respond timely to assessments and audits, to remaining compliant, and even fulfilling our mission. When it comes to collective bargaining, USM institutions are just not all one size fit all. So I'm asking that you vote unfavorably for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carlo Collada.
Good afternoon, Chair McIntosh, Vice Chair Chang, and committee members. I'm Carlo Collada, Vice President for Administration and Finance at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I appreciate the opportunity to offer our thoughts on House Bill 486. It is our opinion that this proposed legislation would have substantial negative impacts on the University of Maryland, College Park, our employees, and as you've heard, on other University System of Maryland institutions. UMCP is Maryland's flagship university and one of the nation's preeminent public research institutions. We are significantly different from other system institutions in several ways. Our operations are substantial, extensive, multifaceted. As you've heard, we have over 3,300 employees represented by bargaining units on our campus. Our very high research activity classification requires many of our facilities are complex and need to be maintained by skilled trades persons and staff. And as you've heard, our location within the Washington, D.C. Beltway has a high cost of living and high market rates for salary and wages. These differences suggest the proposed system-wide collective bargaining structure may not serve well individual institutions or its employees. For example, negotiating only at a system-wide level could decrease College Park's overall wage practices, making it difficult to recruit and retain skilled employees. Conversely, it could increase wage practices in lower cost areas, creating budget pressure on institutions with different missions and different geographic locations. We are also very concerned that the proposed legislation contradicts the authority of the university presidents over personnel matters on campus, and at College Park could jeopardize our Middle States accreditation. This is not a hypothetical concern, as we have had recent firsthand experience with this issue when in 2018, Board of Regents' intrusion on College Park's campus personnel matters triggered more than a year of accreditation review and accreditation warning and uncertainty regarding our future accreditation status. And finally, the bill proposes a single consolidated MOU for all employees and all bargaining units and would, in our opinion, create extensive bureaucratic hurdles, slowing our ability to identify and quickly address institution-specific issues for our employees. And we mentioned a moment earlier, COVID practices across the state. And in fact, I think the system institution should be applauded for the tailored approach, which was appropriate with the different counties and different positivity rates across the state. Different presidents made different decisions about starting and stopping online or not online, how many people are in housing and so forth. And I can say here at College Park, we're quite proud of our nearly 90,000 administered tests with a positivity rate below 1%. In summary, the University of Maryland College Park respectfully advocates for an unfavorable report on HB 486. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I believe that concludes the opposition. We do have members who have questions. I'll start with Delegate Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Your leadership for your employees is terrific. I mean, I'd almost think you were the people that they had selected and paid to formally represent them in this body. I guess my question is for Ms. Skolnick. What holidays would be appropriate for Coppin State but not for Frostburg?
I'm not quite sure why you're asking that question. When I mentioned holiday, well, let me just say this. There are certain state mandated holidays, and all of the universities provide a holiday to employees for each of those. I think it's 11 state recognized holidays, but each campus sets its own academic calendar, and almost every campus has a break over Christmas where students go home and then come back. So some of the holidays are observed, let's say Columbus Day, for example. That may not be observed in October, it may be observed in December when a university may close down for several days or even a week over winter break. So it's not that employees are not getting the same number of holidays, but the holiday schedule is different at every university, at every campus.
So you want to make sure that UMBC can have Columbus Day in October and Frostburg can have Columbus Day in December?
Or that they can set a holiday schedule that works well for their academic calendar, right? They don't all, the campuses start at different dates. Some of them have January terms, some of them don't. They have different length of breaks. So, and that is driven, I would say, by the academic side and what works for the course schedules.
Okay, so there's some reason that Frostburg would have a shorter winter break than, University of Maryland Eastern Shore?
Well, there's a reason why UMB, for example, has a shorter winter break than Frostburg. Frostburg typically would not have a shorter winter break.
Okay, what's the difference? I mean, why would a janitor at Frostburg get a different academic? I mean, why would that affect the janitor at the Frostburg?
Because in some cases, the university actually closes down during winter break. So the entire university closes, and that provides, there's some savings related to that. The facilities aren't up and running in the same way that they are during the academic semesters.
Okay, and so the accreditors are worried if a school is shut down and for how long, and whether the janitors are on the job or not that day? I'm very confused by this, as you know from our previous discussions on the topic.
The accreditors are concerned that presidents have the authority necessary to carry out their responsibilities. And I think the example referenced by Carlo Colella is a very good one. And, that was a situation where the board did direct certain personnel actions, and that resulted in a year-long review by the accreditation body.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I'll just tell you that I think the Board of Regents needed to take a more active role with some things that were going on at some of the campuses. So if that's the risk to accreditation, then I think maybe that's a discussion that we need to have with the accreditors. I think there's a reason we have a Board of Regents. So it's an interesting topic, but maybe not on this bill. I thank you for your answer, and thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Delegate Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question would be applied to folks from College Park. I'm just curious, one hearing from the panel in favor and then hearing from you. If the locals at College Park wanted to negotiate specifically on wages, I mean, could they? And then who would be the final approval?
So I referenced salary practices, and one of the things, we have a scale, that is sort of a broadband scale. And one of the practices that we have here at College Park, because of the competitiveness for certain trades, is to bring people in higher in the scale than perhaps our colleagues do. Wage rate increases are subject to funding authorization from the state of Maryland. So as a practical matter, if we do not get additional funding, it's very difficult to be able to support wage increases, be they cost of living or merit. So I think one of the comments that comes back frequently is we don't have funding to be able to increase salary independent of action by the state.
And by state, you mean the Chancellor and the Board of Regents?
More specifically, in the example I used, the General Assembly and the Governor, state funding is a critical part of our budgeting process, and salary and wages comprise nearly 2/3 of our overall budget. So if we are, if we don't get additional appropriation, it's very difficult to do any across the board cost of living merit.
So what I'm hearing is it's not simply up to you and up to the university. There's other organizations in play. I know I referenced the Chancellor, Board of Regents, you mentioned the legislature, but doesn't that sort of prove the point here? I mean, we're talking about negotiating and collective bargaining for your employees that you want specific controls over at the university level. And if that was, I would say, working effectively, then we wouldn't need to have this conversation, but apparently it's not. But one of the arguments is that you want that control locally, but you already have restrictions where you can't control these wage discussions that need to be approved by something larger than just the university. So I guess what I'm hearing you say is it almost shows why this bill is needed, not necessarily why we don't need it.
Well, salary and wages is one component of conditions of employment. There are a lot of other components that we do have more direct control over. We mentioned parking, we mentioned shifts, we mentioned start times. There's a lot of things that are very campus specific that it's important, in my view, to be able to address that at the campus level. And as was indicated, and I think in the earlier testimony, there are some institutions that do collectively bargain on some items. And so that opportunity as a voluntary action, I think, has served those institutions well. But I think to try and impose that across the system and not have the authority to be able to determine what's in a comprehensive bargaining arrangement is very potentially detrimental to individual institutions.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Very well.
Madam Chair, this is Dawn Rhodes. May I respond to Delegate Young's comment?
Yes.
Thank you. The increase that University of Maryland, Baltimore implemented, we paid for out of our funds. We did not get state appropriations. And I'd also like to respond to the comment about a plumber is a plumber, is a housekeeper is a housekeeper. The mission for which we have at our institutions and our organization and our culture, it drives the positions we have. Carlo and I both have the title of Vice President of Finance and Admissions. Our portfolios are very different. It is part of our fiduciary responsibility to try to pay appropriate to our wage market. To force us to pay other than our wage market forces us not to respond to our fiduciary responsibilities.
And I apologize, Madam Chair, I don't want to belabor the point. I just wanted the main crux of the question was that there is an outside entity that influences that decision, not just at the individual university level. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Haynes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll try to be very brief with my question, but I have one question with about 2 parts. Is that okay? Okay. Thank you very much. I don't know who this question could be directed to. I think it may be Mr. Carlo Colello, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. You mentioned something earlier, and I may have missed it, on the accreditation could be impacted system-wide or either at College Park specifically. Can you give me a concrete example, unless I missed it earlier, on how system-wide collective bargaining could negatively impact accreditation? And the sub part of my question is, this is a system, a university system. Can someone provide to me with some specificity of what binds all of these campuses together where it doesn't create a negative impact from the administration's perspective? I'm assuming that someone has a policy somewhere that is system-wide that doesn't provide, from the administration standpoint, a negative impact. So could you just sort of give me some examples on both of those?
Certainly, I will try to do that. In terms of accreditation, and the example I referenced, many of you, I think, may be familiar. This is personnel decisions that were imposed upon our campus president at the time by a Board of Regents activity. And the accreditation board, for us, it's Middle States Accreditation. A requirement to be accredited is to have sufficient autonomy and have clear governance, leadership, and administration policies that allow institutional presidents to exercise autonomy over the campus themselves. So that action, that personnel action that came to us from the regents resulted in this campus undergoing a review, being put on warning. And as I said, for some period of time, our accreditation was at risk, which means we would not have been eligible, among other things, for federal funding. So that's an example of a real impact to us because of the way the accreditation boards determine whether or not a higher ed institution can be accredited. Is it autonomous? And I'm not an expert in the governing boards, but that's where I would refer you for a bit more information. Regarding system-wide policy that is applicable across the board, Ms. Skolnick can probably address that, but these, I know Ms. Skolnick can speak a little bit about the difference between system-wide general policies and then the execution and administration that happens at institutional level.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So the Board of Regents, just to clarify, I think you asked earlier, what do these institutions have in common, or what is the, where is it written? What's the overarching commonality? Each of the USM institutions are governed by the same governing board. The Board of Regents serves as the governing board for each of the 12 institutions, in the same way that Morgan State University has a governing board, a board of trustees, or Baltimore City Community College or St. Mary's. They each have a governing board. Well, in this case, the Board of Regents is the governing board for Frostburg, but it's also the governing board for College Park or for UMB. So that's the connection there. The Board of Regents does pass broad policies, including personnel policies. But each of the institutions is typically required to implement those policies and create procedures that don't conflict with the policies, but they also have the opportunity to negotiate through collective bargaining changes in those policies. I'll give you an example. The Board of Regents policy gives employees a certain number of days of annual leave when they first come on board. Well, several of the institutions have negotiated additional number of days of annual leave for their employees through collective bargaining. So I hope I've answered your question. If not, I'm happy to try further.
You have, and Madam Chair, can I just ask one quick follow-up question to Ms. Skolnick?
Make it quick.
Okay. And that is, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And so my question really is, there seems to be some connectivity as it relates to policies. And so my question is if I play this out, are you saying that they're under collective bargaining system-wide, that it would jeopardize that altogether? Or is there a possibility to accommodate within the system on some areas?
Well, the policies would continue to be necessary for a couple of reasons. One is that not all of the employees across the system at the different institutions are members of a union. So these policies apply to also to employees who are not part of a bargaining unit. Okay. But what this enforced consolidated bargaining would do would be to require one MOU, one agreement that would apply to all of the institutions. So the only way to achieve separate rules or separate conditions at different institutions would be to have a separate local negotiation with the president of that institution. Now, the law does allow for that. This proposed bill allows for that, but unfortunately it gives the unions veto power over whether or not that can happen. So if the union doesn't want to have individual negotiations at Frostburg over the amount of annual leave that employees are entitled to get, then they can prevent that from happening.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have some follow-up, but I don't want to belabor the time of the committee. And thank you for the leeway on the follow-up questions, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a relatively quick question to just sort of follow up on what some of my colleagues have mentioned about accreditation, and this is for Mr. Colella, and I appreciate you all being here. So, you raised the issue of the accreditation concern over, the incident surrounding Jordan McNair's death and the personnel decisions around it. I just wanted to ask you that had nothing to do with the collective bargaining piece. And I wanted to just point your attention to a couple of things that Middle States actually writes in its Characteristics of Excellence, which is their 100-page document of sort of best practices and what they're looking for when they're doing accreditation. And it says the existence of collecting bargaining agreements is an institutional matter, or as in the case of some public institutions, a matter of public policy. Although Middle States Commission on Higher Ed takes no position with respect to a decision to collectively bargain, they talk about some of the potential impacts. And then in another section, it says it is often the role of the governing body to oversee, to establish personnel policies and procedures, to conduct or to direct the conduct of collective bargaining agreements where appropriate. So again, that seems to me like that's a pretty big distinction between how Middle States views collective bargaining and how Middle States potentially could have viewed the interference with firing of personnel as it related to Mr. McNair's passing. correct?
What middle states had issue with principally was the autonomy and authority of the president of this institution. So whether it applied to collective bargaining, a particular set of circumstances having to do with the facts of that case, their standard 7 is what they raised as a concern. That's what we went under review for them to evaluate whether or not there was sufficient autonomy and independence of the institution to continue to have accreditation.
I would just point out that the coach was not a member of the union. There was no collective bargaining agreement that covered his employment. So I think they're very different issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, Delegate Acevera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions to the panelists, to Ms. Skolnick and Ms. Rhodes. First, Ms. Skolnick, I noticed in your written testimony that you had alluded to that this bill would change or revoke the legislative authority granted to USM. And I'm curious, as the legislative body with both policy and budget oversight, is it not our role to sort of determine whether a change in law is warranted? And to Ms. Rhodes, since assuming your new role, have you met with AFSCME or with the union that exclusively represents bargaining unit members? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Ms. Skolnick first.
Sure. Yes, of course, it is the role of the General Assembly to pass laws and to amend those laws when it sees fit. But the point that's being made here is that this amendment to the collective bargaining statute has an impact on the on other legislatively established authority that is given to the presidents, and the distinction between the role and authority of the Board of Regents versus that of the presidents of the institution. And I do believe that changing the collective bargaining statute would truly undermine the scheme that was set up when the system was first established, which was, as I said, was intended to be a very decentralized system. Unlike some other states that have very centralized system, Maryland has a decentralized system. The chancellor does not dictate to the presidents. The presidents work collaboratively with each other to come up with best practices to address certain issues, but ultimately the president of each institution has the authority to manage that institution.
Okay, next.
Thank you for your question. Yes, I have met with AFSCME members. When I was going through the fact that I had focus groups, custodians, security officers, facility and operations, those are our AFSCME employees at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I have met with the president, and Angie is very fond of saying, I can call Ms. Rhodes. There were other actions that were taken as a result of those focus groups that truly demonstrated the care and concern over those areas. And so they know that we care about them and we have a great relationship. We did that increase because it was the right thing to do. And we paid for it out of our own pockets.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I think that concludes the questions. This concludes the bill hearing. We thank you all for coming today and being a part of this hearing on both sides. And we'll look forward to working on this bill in subcommittee. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
You're very welcome. And Delegate Sullivan, you have House Bill 460, which we will move to now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this will be a little bit quicker. I'll see eye to eye on this one. So this is a bill that this committee passed unanimously last session, and the full House passed it unanimously as well. It's called the Transfer with Success Act. Basically, what it does is tries to improve the process where folks from our community college system transfer to our four-year system by essentially creating better pathways of communication between the schools that are receiving the students and those community colleges, collects data and requires better communication back and forth when a credit or a course is denied. So we want to make sure that students who are trying to get their bachelor's degree, which about 80% of students who enter community colleges have intention to get their ultimate bachelor's degree by transferring. In Maryland, actually, the number of students who have started out with an associate's degree has actually doubled in the last decade. And the problem has been that for many of these students who try to go on, almost half of the credits that students who start at community colleges try to transfer to four-year institutions actually lose. So we wind up sort of paying for it twice. We pay for it when we work to subsidize our community colleges, and then we wind up paying for it when they're at their four-year schools, and it really sets students back. So again, this is a real common sense bill that would just require communication between those two entities. If a student were to get a credit or a course denied, both the community college and the four-year would have to talk to one another to try to figure out maybe there was a memorandum of understanding or a policy that was missed, or they could give a closer look at a class. Also allows the community colleges to have a better sense of what's being accepted and what's not, so they could modify their curriculum, and it's a step forward in the right direction to getting our students the quickest and easiest path to graduate. The last thing I'll point out is actually DLS raised this issue as an ever-growing concern for our state system in the 2021 issue papers, particularly with the emphasis on early college enrollment in our high schools. And they actually outlined the proposals in this bill as some of the great solutions to improving the problem. So I hope we can continue to move forward with this bill. USM offered a couple of minor tweaks to the bill that we passed last year. Totally fine with that, and look forward to hopefully a quick move out of the committee again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the sponsor? Very good. Thank you. That was a quick one. All right.
Thank you.
We're now going to move to House Bill 456. And I believe the sponsor, Delegate Jacobs, is tied up in his own committee and has asked none other than our own Delegate Beitzel to present the bill. So Delegate Beitzel, it'll get a more favorable report with you presenting it anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Okay. It's a pleasure for me to present for my good friend Delegate Jacobs a bill entitled the Correctional Officers Retirement System. This is for Kent County. It's a local bill for Kent County only. And what it does is it requires Kent County Detention Center officers to become members of the Correctional Officers Retirement System as a condition of employment. And it's subject to Kent County beginning participation in CORS and past eligibility and credible service with Kent County transfers to CORS for the affected officers, and they are not subject to specified credit transfer provisions in current law. And the bill affects only Kent County, and this is assuming that Kent County elects to participate in CORS, and the Kent County commissioners have indicated that they're in favor of this. And it would require additional liabilities for Kent County in the amount of $598,000. And they are apparently in agreement to provide that. And here to provide more details and explain the bill more fully is Marty Hale. Do you have him on your witness list?
I do. And there was someone else that was signed up earlier.
Warden Dennis Howell.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Warden Herb Dennis.
Yeah, so that's all right. All right. I want to make sure we get both of you. We do have a question. Is there a question of the sponsor of this bill? No? Okay. Well, let's have Mr. Hale and the two Kent County commissioners who are here. Mr. Hale, go first.
Thank you, Chair McIntosh, and thank you for inviting me, Vice Chair Chang, and the committee members. Kent County Commissioners would like the option for correctional officers to enter the Correctional Officers Retirement System. often referred to as CORES. This system offers enhanced benefits over the current employees' pension system, which all of our employees, with the exception of our law enforcement officers, are members of. Some additional information that is relevant. CORES offers enhanced benefits, including fewer years of service for an unreduced retirement benefit. Because of the enhanced benefit, it is beneficial for recruiting qualified applicants and trained officers for the Kent County Detention Center. Queen Anne's County recently, their detention center entered CORES on July 1st, 2020. They joined CORES because they compete directly with and lose employees to Anne Arundel County due to Anne Arundel County's enhanced benefit package for retirement. Kent County, in turn, competes directly with Queen Anne's County for the same applicant pool. And as a result, if we are denied entrance, then Kent County will lose trained correctional officers to Queen Anne's County, as those seeking the better retirement benefit package would change employment. So it is at a cost to the employer. As mentioned, it's about, it's based upon an actuarial study that we did a preliminary one, and we would have to do a final one. But the cost was $589,000 for the last actuarial study, and that's paid in payments equally divided between over 25 years. So Kent County and the Kent County Detention Center certainly would seek and look forward to a favorable position on this.
Okay, thank you very much. Is Herbert Dennis here?
Yes, I am, Madam Chair McIntosh.
You're very welcome.
How you doing? I agree with Mr. Hale. This has been a issue with trying to hire applicants because we're actually competing with our neighboring county, Queen Anne's County, and they actually have they get lesser years for their retirement. And everybody understands right now that public safety is like something really hard to get into with everything going on in the world. It's hard for us actually to hire people right now. Some of the stressors that correction officers deal with is that the changes that's going on inside of the correctional. We're not only correction officers, we're dealing with more mental health, drug addiction, homelessness, and we're just trying to recruit younger correction officers to join Kent County, which is actually a great county to work for. But it's so hard to compete with getting people here if we have to compete with somebody who are offering you lesser years. So if we can actually be a part of the CORES retirement, it would give us something to hold on to be able to recruit some people here in Kent County. Thank you, ma'am.
You're very welcome. Any questions? Okay, committee, I noticed that the retirement system has a letter testimony submitted, I think information only. With that, we'll conclude the bill hearing, and this concludes our bill hearings for today. And I want to thank everyone, including the public who's watching us virtually, for being with us today in the Appropriations Committee. The only last little announcement I'll have, you all are going to be very busy in your subcommittees during the remainder of the week. We will have a very short voting session on Friday. I believe we only at this point have 3 bills and some withdrawals, some bills that maybe we have to even vote to redirect to another committee. But even though it's a small voting list, I think we need to keep our bills moving out too, so they're in the queue to go to the floor. Our staff will be sending us the voting list well in advance of the voting session on Friday. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody. What's left of it. Great evening, I should say. And thank you. All right.